Tea and terror, a peculiarly British combination. Behind the quaint villages and rolling hills of the UK lurk mysteries that would make your blood run cold. 8 encounters from England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have left witnesses forever changed and skeptics without explanation. What happens when the veil between worlds tears in the most ordinary of places? I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the InBetween. East Anglia, a region of England that most Americans probably couldn't find on a map. But this ancient landscape with its misty marshlands and crumbling churches holds a secret that's been terrorizing locals for centuries. And unlike most folklore that fades into history, this particular terror is still stalking the countryside today. Now, before we dive into the nightmare fuel that is the Black Shuck, we need to understand something about British folklore. They have this thing about black dogs. I'm not talking about your neighbor's friendly black lab. These are something else entirely. Almost every county in Britain has its own version of a phantom black hound. In Somerset, they call it the Girt dog. Up in Yorkshire, it's known as Barghest. The Welsh border has the Black Vaughan. Even the Isle of Man has its own version called the Matty Dhu. But none of these spectral canines have quite the reputation of Black Shuck. The name itself should give you a clue about what we're dealing with. Shuck comes from the Old English word skucka, which means demon or fiend. That's right, this isn't just a ghost story about a big black dog. This is a tale about a creature so terrifying that the Anglo-Saxons literally named it Demon Dog. And while these phantom black dogs are spotted all over Britain, Black Shuck seems to have carved out his own territory in East Anglia, particularly around Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, and Cambridgeshire. Think of it as his own personal hunting ground. And unlike most folklore creatures that stick to the deep woods or abandoned ruins, Shuck has the habit of showing around exactly where people are. Ancient roads? He's there. Churchyards? Absolutely. Lonely crossroads in the middle of the night? That's prime Shuck territory. He's been seen on beaches, in graveyards, and even, as we'll get to in a minute, inside churches during Sunday service. But here's where things get really interesting. Most folklore tends to fade over time, becoming nothing more than bedtime stories to scare children. But Black Shuck? He's still actively terrorizing people today. We're talking about sightings from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and yes, even into the 21st century. And unlike most paranormal encounters that happen to one person alone in the dark, some of Black Shuck's most famous appearances happened in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses. In fact, one of these appearances was so well documented, it changed the town of Bungay forever and made sure that Black Shuck would never be forgotten. The memory is so indelible that the citizens of Bungay decided to make lemonade from lemons and in 2022 started the Black Shuck Festival. Kids in demon dog costumes, artists showing their Shuck-inspired creations. It's like watching a town reclaim its nightmares and turn them into sweet dreams. You can check out their festival website in the description later, but first, let me tell you about the morning that started it all. Because while today's Bungay might celebrate with street food and face paint, that fateful Sunday in 1577 served up something far less appetizing. The date is August 4th, 1577. The townspeople of Bungay are gathered in St. Mary's Church for their Sunday morning service, probably thinking about anything except imminent doom. But Mother Nature has other plans. A storm rolls in, and not just any storm. We're talking Old Testament levels of fury here. According to Abraham Fleming, a clergyman who documented the events just days after they happened, this tempest brought
darkness, rain, hail, thunder, and lightning as was never seen the like.
The congregation huddles together as thunder shakes the very foundations of the church. Lightning flashes illuminate the stained glass windows, creating an eerie light show that has everyone on edge. But then something happens that makes them forget all about the storm. There, in the middle of their sacred house of worship, appears what Fleming describes as
a black dog, or the devil in such a likeness.
This isn't some wet stray seeking shelter. The creature is described as having an absolutely horrible appearance, so bad that it makes the congregation believe Judgment Day has finally arrived. Before anyone can react, this demonic hound tears down the center aisle of the church
with great swiftness and incredible haste.
It passes between two people who are kneeling in prayer and, I kid you not,
wrings the necks of them both at one instant, clean backward.
They die right there on their knees. But Shuck isn't done. The beast then attacks another member of the congregation, leaving him, as Fleming puts it,
drawn together and shrunk up, as it were a piece of leather scorched in a hot fire.
Amazingly, this third victim survives, although I'm betting his church attendance is never quite the same after that. Just minutes later, Black Shuck appears at Holy Trinity Church in Blytheburg, about 12 miles away. Same storm, same terror, same results. The demon dog bursts through the doors, kills 2 more people, and then flees, but not before leaving his mark on the church doors. Those claw marks are still visible on the north door today, what locals call the devil's fingerprints. The attack is so violent that it supposedly causes the church steeple to collapse through the roof, though skeptics will tell you that it's probably just the lightning. Yeah, because lightning strikes that can take out a church steeple are so much more comforting than demon dogs. The people of Bungay never forgot what happened that day. The town's coat of arms now features Black Shuck himself. There's a weather vane in the shape of the devil dog. The local football team? They're called the Black Dogs. It's like they decided that if you can't beat them, at least put them on your merch. But before you write this off as just another medieval tall tale, consider this. We have multiple contemporary sources documenting what happened. The story appears not only in Fleming's detailed account, but also in the records of several other churches and even in the official chronicles of the time. Whatever prowled through those churches that stormy Sunday morning, it left an impression that's lasted nearly 450 years. And maybe that's exactly what Black Shuck wanted, because this wasn't his first appearance, and it certainly wouldn't be his last. So what exactly does a demon dog look like? Well, that depends on who you ask and when you ask them. Because unlike your typical cryptid that has a fairly consistent description, Black Shuck seems to be a master of keeping people guessing. The most common description? Picture the biggest, blackest dog you've ever seen. Now make it bigger. We're talking anywhere from the size of a large mastiff to, and I'm not making this up, as big as a horse. His fur is described as shaggy and matted, the kind that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it's the eyes that really seal the deal. Most witnesses describe them as blazing red, like burning coals in the darkness, though sometimes they're reported as green, and occasionally, in a particularly weird twist, there's only one giant eye right in the middle of his head, like some kind of canine cyclops. Interestingly enough, for a creature his size, Black Shuck moves like a ghost. No footprints, no sound, nothing. Imagine a horse-sized dog somehow moving in complete silence. Witnesses report seeing him run alongside their cars, keeping pace even at high speeds without making a single sound. No panting, no claws clicking on pavement, just silence. And Shuck definitely has his favorite haunts. He's particularly fond of ancient pathways, crossroads, and churches, places that folklore traditionally considers boundaries between our world and whatever's on the other side. It's almost like he's patrolling these liminal spaces, these in-between places where reality gets a little thin. But here's the amazing part, and this is what makes Black Shuck different from your typical spooky story. He doesn't always show up to cause harm. In fact, some encounters with him are downright protective. The same creature that bursts into churches and snapped necks has also been known to guide lost travelers home and chase away those who mean harm to innocent people. Take this story from the 1800s. A woman walking alone at night suddenly found herself being followed by a massive black dog. But then she passed a group of rough-looking men who, she later overheard, had been planning to rob and assault her. The only reason they didn't? The enormous black hound walking beside her. When she reached her home safely and turned to thank her protector, he'd vanished into thin air. This Jekyll and Hyde routine makes Black Shuck particularly perplexing. Is he a harbinger of death? A guardian spirit? Both? The locals have learned to take a better safe than sorry approach. If you see a giant black dog on a lonely road in East Anglia, it's probably best not to stick around long enough to figure out which version you're dealing with. But even with all these varying descriptions and behaviors, there's one consistent thread that runs through almost every Black Shuck encounter: the feeling of otherworldliness. Whether he's terrorizing churchgoers or protecting lone travelers, there's always something unmistakably supernatural about him. This isn't just some oversized stray or escaped wolf. There's something ancient and powerful at work here, something that's been stalking the misty fields and ancient roads of East Anglia for centuries. And speaking of centuries, while that church incident in 1577 might be Black Shuck's most famous appearance, it's far from his last. In fact, some of the most intriguing encounters happened well within living memory. Now, you might think that in our modern age of smartphones and security cameras, a horse-sized demon dog would have a hard time keeping a low profile. But Black Shuck didn't get the memo. If anything, the 20th century seemed to make him bolder. Let's start with what happened in Walberswick in 1945. A couple had rented a little hut between the salt marshes and Dunwich Forest. Not exactly prime real estate, but hey, it was post-war Britain. People made do. One night, they are startled by something pounding on their door. And I don't mean a polite knock. We're talking about the kind of pounding that makes you wonder if someone's trying to break down your wall with a battering ram. When they peek through the window, there it is. A massive creature with matted black fur and one blood-red eye hurling itself against the door. The terrified couple does what any rational people would do. They pile every piece of furniture they own against the door. But that doesn't stop whatever that thing is. It spends hours throwing itself against the walls, then leaping onto the roof, pacing back and forth like some kind of nightmarish guard dog. Then comes the howl. Now, I've heard people try to describe the sound, but they always struggle. The couple says it starts low, building to a crescendo that shakes the entire hut, then drops to frequencies so deep they seem to bypass their ears and vibrate straight through their bones. After one final endless howl, everything goes silent. They wait until dawn, because nobody in their right mind is going outside before then. and find massive claw marks scoring the door and walls. Windows are shattered. The roof looks like something has been dancing the cha-cha in steel-toed boots up there. However, in the soft, sandy soil around the hut, not a single paw print. Nothing. Just their own tracks from the day before. Fast forward to 1972. Graham Grant is working the early morning shift at the Dodleston Rescue Headquarters. He spots what he thinks is a large black dog on the beach about a quarter mile north of him. Nothing too weird about that, right? Except this dog suddenly vanishes. Not runs away, not hides behind something, just blinks out of existence, like someone hit a cosmic light switch. But my favorite modern encounter happens in 1988 on the lonely road from Norwich to Bauberg. A cyclist, and remember, this is way before everyone is kitted out in GoPros and LED gear, is pedaling along the dead of night when something massive and black overtakes him. It's running alongside his bike, and yes, it has those signature glowing eyes. Before our cyclist can properly panic, the dog suddenly charges ahead and blocks the road, forcing him to stop. Seconds later, a car comes screaming around the corner way too fast, right where the cyclist would have been. The car seems to hit the dog, but Shuck just fades away like the morning mist. Our cyclist later says,
"All I can say is that on that night, the dog saved my life."
These aren't just campfire stories passed down through generations. These are first-hand accounts from people who are probably still alive today. People with jobs and mortgages and absolutely no reason to make up stories about giant phantom dogs. And the sightings haven't stopped. The pattern in these modern sightings is fascinating. While Shuck still shows up at churches and graveyards, he seems to have developed a particular fondness for roads. Maybe he's adapting to the times. After all, why haunt old footpaths when you can terrorize the A149? But there's something else that's happening here too. More and more often, he's showing up not to harm, but to help. It's like East Anglia's most terrifying resident is slowly transforming into its most intimidating guardian angel. But before you start hoping for your own protective phantom pooch, remember this: Black Shuck doesn't exactly give you a warning about which version you're gonna get. And trust me, you don't want to flip that particular coin on a dark night in Norfolk. So why is this massive phantom hound still prowling around East Anglia after all these centuries? Well, to understand Black Shuck, we need to zoom out, way out, because this isn't just some random ghost story. We're looking at something that might be as old as human civilization itself. See, pretty much every ancient culture had their own version of a supernatural canine guardian. The Egyptians had Anubis, that jackal-headed guy who guided souls to the afterlife. The Greeks gave us Cerberus, the three-headed hound guarding the gates of Hades. And up in the Norse lands, they had Garm, who kept watch over the entrance to their underworld. Notice a pattern here? Dogs weren't just man's best friend. They were basically cosmic security guards. But in almost every one of these traditions, these supernatural dogs show up in what scholars call liminal spaces. Those in-between places where the normal world starts to get a little fuzzy. Crossroads, bridges, shorelines. Wouldn't you know it, those are exactly the kinds of places where people keep running into our boy Shuck. Remember all those sightings on ancient pathways and old Roman roads? Turns out there might be a reason for that. Some researchers think Black Shuck follows what are called ley lines, these supposed energy pathways that crisscross the British landscape, connecting ancient sites. It's like he's patrolling some kind of prehistoric supernatural highway system. Now, you're probably thinking, there's got to be a rational explanation, right? And sure, Skeptics have tried. Some blame ball lightning for the Bungay Church incident, which maybe explains the scorching, but last time I checked, lightning doesn't typically have glowing red eyes or run down church aisles. Mass hysteria? That might work for one incident, but we're talking about hundreds of sightings across centuries. The really wild part? Modern science might actually be backing up some of the old legends. You know how witnesses always talk about the feeling of this overwhelming sense of dread before Shuck appears? Turns out there are certain electromagnetic frequencies that can trigger exactly that feeling in the human brain. Where do these frequencies tend to be strongest? Along fault lines and, you guessed it, those same ancient pathways where Shuck likes to hang out. Some places take the threat seriously enough that they've actually put up barriers. There are caves in the Norfolk coast that have been sealed off, supposedly to protect bat colonies. But ask the locals and they'll tell you those bars aren't keeping anything out. They're trying to keep something in. The British military even got involved at one point during World War II. They actually used the legend of Black Shuck in their coastal defense plans. They figured that if German spies were lurking around, stories of a massive demon dog might keep them from poking around certain sensitive areas at night. Talk about weaponizing folklore. But maybe we're all missing the point. What if Black Shuck isn't just some random supernatural entity? What if he's something more fundamental? Think about it. Here's this creature that shows up at boundaries, at crossroads, at moments of transition. Sometimes he's terrifying, sometimes he's protective, but he's always marking some kind of threshold. It's almost like he's not just haunting East Anglia, he's guarding it, standing watch over the boundaries between this world and whatever lies beyond. And maybe that's why he's still around when so many other legends have faded away. Because as long as there are boundaries to guard and thresholds to watch over, there's still a job for an otherworldly watchdog to do. February 8th, 1855, in the quaint county of Devon in southwest England. Rolling hills, charming villages, and on this particular morning, a fresh blanket of snow covering the ground. It's like a postcard, except for one tiny detail that's about to turn this idyllic setting into the backdrop for one of history's most baffling mysteries. As the good folk of South Devon roll out of bed and look out their frost-covered windows, they're met with a sight that would make even the stiffest Englishman spill his tea. Snaking through the pristine snow are tracks, but not just any tracks. These aren't the paw prints of a neighbor's cat or the boot tracks of an early rising milkman. These are something altogether different. There on the ground is a line of kind of horseshoe-shaped hoof-like marks, each about 4 inches long and 3 inches wide, running single file with each print about 8 inches apart. Now, my first thought was, maybe it's just a really well-trained horse. Well, setting aside the fact that it would have to be a super small horse, I suggest you grab your beverage of choice and kick back for a bit because we are just getting started. These tracks don't just stick to the ground. No. That would be way too boring. They scale walls. They traipse over rooftops. They even seem to pass through narrow drain pipes, emerging on the other side without missing a step. And perhaps the most amazing of all, they cross a 2-mile stretch of the River Exe estuary, or the spot where the River Exe meets the English Channel. That's right. Whatever's making these tracks apparently takes a little stroll across the water. Jesus himself would be impressed. But wait, there's more. These tracks aren't from some strange animal that decided to cut across a few backyards. These tracks stretch for a mind-boggling 100 miles, maybe more. From Exmouth to Topsham, from Dawlish to Teignmouth. Across fields and farms, through towns and villages, this trail of impossible footprints stretches the entire South Devon area. It's like a paranormal pub crawl. Now imagine you're a simple Devon farmer or shopkeeper. You've lived your whole life in this one little area where the strangest thing you've ever seen is maybe a two-headed calf at the county fair. Suddenly, you're trying to make sense of something that defies all logical explanation. Something that can climb walls, cross rivers, and cover vast distances in a single night. What would you do? Well, if you're anything like the good people of Devon in 1855, you'd probably panic, which is exactly what they do. As news of the tracks spreads faster than a fox in a henhouse, the whole area erupts into a frenzy of fear and speculation. Churches fill to bursting as terrified residents seek divine protection. Local militia groups form, patrolling the streets with muskets and pitchforks. Though what good they think these things will do against a wall-climbing, river-crossing entity is beyond me. But here's where things get really interesting. In times of inexplicable events, humans have a tendency to reach for the most dramatic explanations. And in the 19th century England, steeped in centuries of folklore and Christian tradition, there's one explanation that pops to the top of everyone's mind. The devil himself has paid a visit to Devon. That's right, Old Scratch, Beelzebub, the Prince of Darkness, whatever you want to call him, but suddenly he's the talk of every pub and parlor in the country. The idea spreads like wildfire. After all, who else could leave such bizarre tracks? Who else could traverse such impossible terrain so fast? And don't forget the hoof-like prints. If there's one thing everyone knows about the devil, it's that he's got a rather distinctive choice in footwear. Local legends and superstitions, long simmering beneath the surface of polite society, bubble up with renewed vigor. Stories of demonic visitations from centuries past are dusted off and retold with fresh urgency. That old tale about Farmer Giles's great-grandfather who claimed to have seen a cloven-hoofed figure dancing in the moonlight? Suddenly, it isn't just a quaint fireside story, but potential evidence in the case of the century. Some locals even claim to have heard unearthly shrieks in the night, or to have seen a dark, shadowy figure leaping from rooftop to rooftop. But not everyone is convinced that old Nick has decided to take a winter vacation in Devon. Some of the more skeptical residents propose alternative explanations. Maybe it's an escaped exotic animal from a traveling circus, or maybe a flock of birds. Stranger things have happened. Well, maybe not, but you get the idea. As the days wear on and no more tracks, the initial panic dials back a notch. But the mystery remains. The tracks are real. Hundreds of people have seen them, sketched them, measured them. Something crisscrossed Devon that February night, leaving behind a puzzle that is unsolved to this day. So, we find ourselves with a mystery that has endured for over 150 years. A set of tracks that seemingly defy all logical explanation, a panicked populace convinced they've been visited by the devil himself, and a whole lot of questions left unanswered. But is any of this true? It's time to channel up some Benedict Cumberbatch and dive into the evidence on both sides. Let's start with any historical documentation. Is there any? Luckily for us, the devil's footprints caused such a satanic panic that it made headlines in several newspapers, like the Exeter and Plymouth Gazette and the Western Luminary, not to mention the London Times. The Illustrated London News on February 17th, 1855 reports, "It appears on Thursday night last, there was a very heavy fall of snow in the neighborhood of Exeter and the south of Devon. On the following morning, the inhabitants of the above towns were surprised at discovering the tracks of some strange and mysterious animal, endowed with the power of ubiquity, as the footprints were to be seen in all kinds of unaccountable places, on the tops of houses and narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings. or picket fences, as well as in open fields. Alrighty then, but it isn't just the papers that are buzzing about this bizarre occurrence. We have numerous eyewitness accounts from people who saw the tracks firsthand. One such account comes from Reverend H.T. Ellicombe, the vicar of Clyst St. George. In a letter to the Illustrated London News, he writes, "The creature seems to have approached the doors of several houses and then to have retreated, but no one has been able to discover the standing or resting point of this mysterious visitor. On Sunday last, the Reverend Mr. Musgrave alluded to the subject in his sermon and suggested the possibility of the footprints being those of a kangaroo." A kangaroo? But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What do these tracks actually look like? Spoiler alert, they don't look like a kangaroo. But we're in luck because several sketches were made at the time. The most famous of these, published in the Illustrated London News, shows a series of hoof-like prints in a single file. Each print is described as being about 4 inches long and 2 3/4 inches wide, with a stride of about 8 to 16 inches. And the tracks don't just stick to open fields or roads. They are reported to go over houses, high walls, and even haystacks without disturbing the snow on the top. In some places, the tracks seem to go through small holes or tight spaces, emerging on the other side as if whatever made them had simply passed through solid objects. But maybe the most insane aspect of all is the sheer extent of the tracks. They are reported across an area of 100 square miles, crossing rivers and other obstacles that would have been impassable for any known animal. And all of this in a single night. Now, what about the weather conditions that night? Because they play a crucial role in this mystery. The night of February 8th is particularly cold with a heavy snowfall. I don't know how much snow, but it was at least enough to cover everything in a pretty good blanket. This fresh snow provides the perfect canvas for our mysterious track maker. But it also means that whatever left these tracks did so in a relatively short window of time between the end of the snowfall and the early morning when the tracks were discovered. It's worth noting that this isn't an isolated incident. Similar tracks have been reported in other places at different times. In 1840, similar mysterious tracks were found in Scotland. And in 1855, just a month after the Devon incident, similar tracks are reported in South Moulton, Devon. So we have multiple eyewitness accounts, newspaper reports, and even sketches of the tracks that occurred over a vast area in a short period of time, leaving a trail that seems to defy logical explanation. On the other hand, we're dealing with events that happened over 150 years ago. We can't go back and examine the tracks ourselves or interview the witnesses. We're relying on second-hand accounts and interpretations, all filtered through the lens of 19th century superstition and sensationalism. And evidence, especially 150-year-old evidence, can be tricky. It can be misinterpreted, exaggerated, or even fabricated. But now that it's out there for consideration, it's time to play devil's advocate, pun very much intended, and explore some potential explanations for our mysterious tracks. Let's start with the most obvious explanation: animals. After all, we're talking about tracks in the snow, and last time I checked, animals were pretty good at that. Some have suggested that the culprit might have been a badger, a fox, or even an escaped kangaroo. Thank you, Reverend Musgrave. The problem is, none of these animals quite fit the facts. Badgers and foxes don't typically travel in straight lines for miles on end, and I'm pretty sure they haven't mastered the art of scaling walls. As for the kangaroo theory, well, let's just say that if there was a 6-foot marsupial bouncing around Devon in 1855, someone probably would have noticed. Some researchers have proposed that the tracks might have been made by a wood mouse. These little critters are known to make strange tracks in the snow by hopping, leaving what looks like a line of hoofprints. It's an intriguing idea, but it doesn't explain how these tracks appeared on rooftops or how they crossed such long distances in one night. Moving on to the weather explanation, some have suggested that the tracks were actually formed by some kind of natural phenomenon. One theory proposes that chunks of ice might have fallen from telegraph wires, creating hoof-like impressions in the snow. It's an interesting thought, but it doesn't account for the tracks' continuity or their appearance in areas without telegraph wires. Another weather-related theory involves something called frost polygons. These are honeycomb-like patterns that can form in frozen soil under certain conditions. When snow falls on the top of these patterns, it can create tracks that look somewhat similar to the devil's footprints. But again, it doesn't explain the tracks on the rooftops or their linear nature. Now, let's venture into more controversial territory: hoaxes and pranks. It wouldn't be the first time someone faked out their neighbors, especially in a small community where entertainment might have been hard to come by in the dead of winter. But let's think about the logistics for a moment. We're talking about tracks that covered over 100 miles, allegedly in a single night. That would be a level of commitment that I cannot even comprehend. Some have suggested that multiple people might have been involved, each creating a section of the tracks. But that would require a level of coordination and secrecy that seems highly unlikely. And no one ever came forward to claim responsibility. Ever. Then there's the theory of mass hysteria or exaggeration. It's possible that a few odd tracks in the snow were blown way out of proportion as the news spread, with each retelling adding more fantastical elements like a hysterical version of Operator. We've seen this kind of thing happen before with other mysterious phenomena. But this doesn't quite explain the consistent descriptions from multiple eyewitnesses or the sketches made at the time. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that the truth lies in some combination of these factors. Maybe an animal did leave some unusual tracks, which were then exaggerated in retellings and perhaps even embellished by a few opportunistic hoaxers jumping on the bandwagon. And then, of course, there's the explanation that started it all. That these were indeed the footprints of the devil himself, out for a nighttime stroll through the Devon countryside. So the next time you're out on a snowy night, take a moment to look around. You never know what you might find, or who might find you. For many of us, the year 1984 conjures images of dystopian futures now lost in the past. But for 3 people living in the small village of Dodleston in Cheshire County, England, 1984's dystopian future was a present-day quandary, a puzzle that would just get crazier and crazier for almost 2 years. Ken, Debbie, and Nicola, or Nick, were living together in an old cottage called Meadow Cottage in Dodleston. Dodleston is a little village in the county of Cheshire that was also the birthplace of Lewis Carroll and his Cheshire cat. Ken was renovating in his spare time, which there wasn't much of, so the renovation seemed to be going on forever. But just when the endless layer of cement dust covering absolutely everything in the house threatens to break the last threads of everyone's patience, they finished the main floor. Now, all it needs is a little paint. Late summer of 1984, the 3 notice a trail of what looked to be cement dust smudges trailing diagonally up the kitchen wall until they stop at the ceiling. They're an average-looking size, but some prints look to have 6 toes. The 3 giggle about it and try to figure out how they were made without success. As their attention to them fades, so do the prints themselves, until they're almost invisible by late fall, when they finally have a chance to paint, adding some much-needed color to the cement gray walls. The next morning, Ken walks into the kitchen and stops in his tracks. On the freshly painted wall are fresh footprints. But these are not on the same track. They're on a different track than the old ones. So they're not just the same ones, just coming through the paint. Ken and Deb are pretty perplexed, but Nick is pretty horrified and about ready to pack her bags. But instead, she grabs the paint and paints the new footprints away. 2 days later, after a major food shopping spree, all three are too tired to figure out what to do with the extra cans of cat food and some other things. So the overflow is left on the kitchen floor to be dealt with in the morning. When the morning comes, Ken discovers the cat food cans stacked up in a neat little pyramid. All right, they decide, this has to be a prank. But who? They decide it has to be Ken's friend John. Ken has always suspected that John has a thing for Debbie. Odd way to show it, but whatever. Not 36 hours later, they are treated to a 4-foot-high precarious tower made of 2 2-liter bottles of lemonade, a bag of dry cat food, and a roll of paper towels. Ken starts to rethink the idea that this is John. He doesn't think John has the skills to pull this off. Anxiety levels start to rise. Everyday creaks and groans of an old house start to freak them out. Weird things are now happening on a regular basis, and John is looking less and less like the culprit. Now Nick is trying to move her career in a new direction toward the performing arts. So to try to help her out, Ken, who's an economics teacher at Hardin High School in Dodleston, is able to check out a BBC microcomputer fitted with the Edward II chip, which turned the computer into a very clunky word processor. Nick is totally excited because now she can really start working on writing some comedy sketches using the computer. After a short tutorial on naming and saving files on the 5-inch floppy disk in the connected disk drive, Nick is off and running, or writing. One Sunday night in December, all three decided to take some time away from the cottage and go see a friend. When they return a few hours later, they see the green glow of the computer screen and realize that no one had turned it off before they left. No big deal. Ken sits down to take a look and sees that there's a new file on the disk, named differently than the single letter names Nick had been using, like ABC. This one is called KDN. Intrigued, Ken opens the file. Now, just to let you guys know, I will be showing you the actual text of these messages on the video, but using a modernized translation for the audio, just to make everything easier to understand.
True are the nightmares of a person that fears. Safe are the bodies of the silent world. Turn, pretty flower, turn towards the sun, for you shall grow and sow. But the flower reaches too high and withers in the burning light. Get out your bricks. Pussycat. Pussycat went to London to seek fame and fortune. Faith must not be lost, for this shall be your redeemer. L.W.
Weird. Ken was fascinated, but didn't really know what to do about it. As December passed, Nick left to go visit family for the holidays and didn't come back for a couple of months. So it wasn't until she was home again in February that Ken borrows the school's computer again. One cold Sunday, the three decide to go hang out at the Red Lion pub for the evening. When they come back, another message is waiting for them.
What strange words you speak, although I must admit that I have also received poor education. Sometimes I think changes are somewhat harmful, for they disrupt many nights of sleep in my bed. I have seen many changes around my house and your home. It is a fitting place, with lights that seem devil-made, and expensive things that only my friend Edmund Gray or the king himself can afford. It was a great crime to have corrupted my house. L.W.
Well, that sounds a little ominous, considering the word bribed in early modern English means to corrupt. And who is L.W.? Who's Edmund Gray? And how are these messages getting on the computer? At first, Ken thinks it's one of the girls playing a prank. But how? They were both with him when both of these messages appeared. And this is 1985 now, so no network or internet connections. In late February, Ken asks to have a private word with another teacher, Peter Trinder. Peter is another teacher at Hardin who, incidentally, had been Ken's English teacher when he was a student there, and is a Tudor-era English specialist with a degree in English from Oxford University. Ken tells him that he's getting these messages just appearing on the computer. Peter looks at the printouts that Ken gives him, and it takes him some time, but he finally gets back to Ken to say that the English used in some of the messages took him some time to look up, and in his humble opinion, it's unlikely a hoaxer would take that kind of time. But it's gotta be a hoax, right? The threesome, now foursome, including Peter, asks LW questions to try to get their arms around what they are dealing with here. Did you live on this land in about 1620? Is the king James or Charles Stuart? Do you have a family? Through the continual back and forth, they find out that LW stands for Lucas Wainman, who says he's in the year 1521 and that the king is Henry VIII, who he says is 46 years old, and the queen is Catherine Parr. But Henry VIII wasn't 46 in 1521. Henry was married to Catherine from 1543 to his death in 1547. And there is more information that he gives that is just flat out wrong. But they decide not to challenge Lucas because they want to keep him talking. However, eventually, Lucas sends an angry message wondering if they are who they say they are, why do they not challenge him on the things that he is saying that should be easy for them to disprove? He's been testing them too. And this goes on for months, with Ken giving copies of all of the new messages to Peter to decipher and opine on regarding whether or not they're legit, and helping Ken figure out ways to try and either prove or disprove their authenticity. Lucas seems to have lived in the same house that Ken and Debbie now live in, and sends his messages through something he calls Alim's Boist. Translation: lightbox. He says that he's a farmer whose wife and son died in the plague in 1517, and that he'd been a dean at Brasenose College at Oxford University. It also seems as if he can see and hear them as well. He talks about the impromptu jam sessions that they sometimes have with Ken's friends. And after Ken, a Jaguar sports car fanatic, leaves him a magazine cut-out picture of a Jaguar, Lucas remarks that his cart won't get far without horses, and even asks what the picture is printed on because it's so smooth. Debbie has a whole other level of strange happening, as she seems to be able to see Lucas as well, sometimes falling into a dream state where she finds herself literally with him. Not to mention that it also seems as if Lucas can send them physical messages as well, leaving notes on paper or scribbling messages on the stone kitchen floor with chalk. Ken reaches out to the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. And this is not some fly-by-night organization. These guys have been around since 1888. They send John Bucknell and Dave Welsh, who quickly zero in on Debbie as being the hoaxer. She immediately says, "Wait a minute, I'm only 19 and haven't a clue how people talked 400 years ago." That answer seems to suffice with John and Dave for now. And of course, nothing happens while they are at the cottage. "That's okay," they say, "we'll be back." But Lucas has gone silent, only to have his mantle taken up by some unknown stranger, letting the foursome know that Lucas has been arrested for witchery for sending the messages through the lightbox.
"You're a foolish scoundrel who has brought nothing less than evil upon the wretch. I hope he comes to no harm, for I guarantee your death by my own hand some way. It was not to be avoided with your charm of lights, and now he sits in the shameful dungeon. It will be your own ruin, Unless you help Lucas, he will die. If you reveal yourselves to the Crown for what you are and display your devilish powers, then his life is saved. Reveal the truth and give no false threats, and explain what is necessary, computer. Friend of Lucas.
The SPR comes back again a few days later, seals up the doors and windows so no one can get in or out, and plants microphones all over the cottage, hoping to catch keyboard noises made by the perpetrator. Nothing. Ken suggests that maybe Lucas isn't writing because he's been executed. And the SPR guys think,
how convenient.
But they say they'll be back. Ken and Debbie find out from Lucas's friend that the sheriff hasn't executed Lucas yet because the box only works when he's around. And the sheriff wants all the power the box presumably holds. Feeling pretty responsible for Lucas's predicament, they actually manage to have a conversation with the sheriff, Sir Thomas Falshurst. They tell the sheriff that unless he releases Lucas immediately, they will use the power of the box to damn his soul to hell. And holy crap, it works!
If you swear to not use your power, then I shall release Lucas within 1 hour.
Lucas is home again, at least for the time being. And they also find out his real name is Thomas Harden. Ken mentions that he's from the year 1985, at which Lucas is shocked, answering,
You said your time is 1985, though I thought you were also from 2109, like your friend who brought me the light box.
He said the box was brought to him by someone named One from 2109. More than a little taken aback by this, Ken decides to message that person too and types into the computer,
Calling 2109.
And in less than an hour, they get a reply from 2109.
We are sorry that we can only give you 2 choices. 1. That you either have your predicament explained in such a non-rhyme way that you may have instant understanding, but cause what should not be to happen. Or 2. Try to understand that you 3 have a purpose that shall, in your lifetime, change the face of history. We, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are all part of the same God, whatever he is.
Well, isn't that interesting? Now they're talking to the past and the future. So Peter tries to question 2109 and gets scolded for endangering the mission. Meanwhile, Lucas has agreed to answer some questions from John Bucknell from the SPR. It's also important to note that through all of this, the poltergeist activity is still happening, and it sounds like it's happening to Thomas too. All the while being reminded by 2109 that should they learn too much information about one another, the entirety of humanity could be at stake. No pressure. So everyone but John heads out to the Red Line while he sits for hours waiting for an answer to the questions that Lucas has agreed to answer. Nothing. Until the group are on their way back. Only then does a message pop up on the monitor. John thinks they must be transmitting the messages to the computer, like wirelessly somehow. That's when a rather interesting message comes through.
Please tell me why you moved my writings to 2109, for I do wish communion with my friend John.
In other words, 2109 is messing with the messages and immediately answers Lucas's questions with,
Do not speak with psychic men.
But Dave has an idea. Alone in the kitchen with the computer, he writes 10 questions to 2109, leaves the computer off, hides the screen so no one can see the questions, and goes into the living room with Deb and Ken to wait. After a while, with no response, Dave turns the computer off without saving the questions, so no one can figure out what they were. 2109 responds.
Yes, we are what you would call a tachyon universe, but your understanding is incorrect. We ask nothing more of you than to carry on as you would prefer.
Not answering their questions directly, but answering them all within the text of the entirety of their message. This gets Dave's attention, and he comes back with 2 more questions for 2109, asking 2109 to tell us the next largest prime number over the largest one we know to date, and if he can solve Fermat's last theorem. Fermat's last theorem is a mathematical puzzle that Fermat, sometime around 1637, said had an answer. But people had been trying to prove that theorem unsuccessfully ever since. 2109's response?
Dave, yes, both questions can be answered. One directly, the other requires an understanding of the new conversion formula. Before we tell you, do you swear to grant us our wish?
Dave's response?
If it be within our power to do so, and that we do not lose our minds or souls or bodies to you.
2109.
Then let the man who is willing to lose these step forward. To lose your soul is to lose all. Surely this would not bother David. Call our bluff.
Cheeky. David is not willing to take that bet. Ken tries to reason with 2109, but I guess no means no, telling Ken,
Answer either yes or no. You asked a question. We answered it. Your turn, if we are to answer questions again. Do you want the answer?
Ken and Debbie certainly think about offering Dave's soul for him, but decide against it. Not giving 2109 the yes or no answer it's waiting for, it writes,
We'll catch the bullets before you pull the trigger. Lots of love. 2109.
So 2109 has the answers to the questions that Dave now can't ask without offering his soul. Checkmate on SPR. John reverted to his original theory that the computer is somehow bugged, and that is pretty much the last they hear from the SPR. Ghosted. Ken, Debbie, and Peter continue their messages back and forth to both Thomas and 2109, and now a third entity known only as One. In fact, Thomas says that One is the one who came out of the green light in Thomas's fireplace to give him the Leamsboist. One seems to also be from the future and is aware of 2109. 2109 and One seem to be somewhat rivals and both take turns at playing good cop, bad cop, with Thomas wondering the whole time, what the hell is going on? It becomes clear that the only way Thomas can be sure that his notes to Ken and Debbie will not be messed with is to write them on physical paper, which he does on several occasions. By December of 1985, one of Ken and Peter's former students, Neil Bartlam, who now works for the local newspaper, the Chester Observer, sits at a table listening to Ken and Peter tell their story. And much to Ken's delight, he's not laughing at them. Ken cringes at the thought of this article actually being published that could very well throw them under the bus. Most interestingly, Neil is able to talk to John Bucknell of the SPR, who does basically throw them under the bus, saying that he believes human agencies are responsible. At this point, Ken's growing more and more frustrated at the lack of help to figure out exactly what is going on in their house. So he calls the SPR again just to get copies of John's case file, which John claims he files on every case. The SPR tells him they have no case file. And not only that, but John Bucknell is in the wind with no one having heard from him. And they've never heard of Dave Welsh. Case? What case? That's when 2109 offers Ken a lifeline. 2109 sends a message that says,
In order that you may pay a little more attention to our needs, we ask you to do the following. There is a brilliant researcher, ufologist. We know you don't like the word. His name is Gary Embro. His ideas differ somewhat to yours, but nevertheless, he can help you with a couple of your problems. You may phone him at the number below and invite him to talk with you. When he comes, show him this and ask him what he makes of it. Peter must do the telephoning.
So they call him. Gary listens to their story, curiosity piqued. and then comes over and conducts some of his own tests to try to figure out what's going on. 2109 makes it known that they want to communicate with Gary privately, with Ken printing out 2109's side of the conversation, sealing the printout in an envelope which they deliver to Gary. Gary gets the message and writes a reply, also sealed in an envelope, which Ken then places on top of the computer, which then, sometime over the course of the next few days, disappears. It's important to know that by this time, Debbie has rented a new place not far away from the cottage in Dodleston, but far enough away that they can get some sleep and relax for a hot minute. So they're no longer at the cottage 24/7. Ken starts to get annoyed at the cat and mouse game happening around him, but 2109 tries to reassure him.
Ken, thank you. We do notice your hard work. Thomas will be back as soon as possible. Our conversation with Gary will not be of interest to you. We aren't plotting anything against you.
And this goes on for a while, with Gary starting to play hard to get when he hands Ken a message for 2109. Only this time, it's not in a secret envelope.
Greetings. I am instructed to apologize, but in any event, I would have done so of my own volition. There will be a letter hopefully this weekend. I'm also instructed to apologize to Ken and Debbie. I must try and answer your last letter. It would appear that you are more important than I had realized in the scheme of things. Gary.
And with this final note, Gary's now in the wind too. Thomas tells the once again threesome, since their friend Nick has moved out by this time, that he's getting evicted from his land and plans to try to go back to Brasenose College at Oxford and write a book about this entire experience. The final message from both Thomas and 2109 come around the middle of March 1986. Thomas writes,
One day you will all sit at my table for wine and meat by my river in Oxford, where we shall read each other's books and rejoice. We shall speak of truth and good men, watching Oxford change together for evermore. In your time, my book is old, but I shall not go to my God until it is written. Then we will all be truly united. My love to you all. I shall wait for you in Oxford. Thomas.
But since he can't really tell anybody about it without being thrown in jail for witchery again, he'll have to hide it someplace. He promises he will hide it where it will be found someday. Has anyone found it? Nope. 2109 signs off with,
Ken, Deb, Peter. True are the nightmares of those that fear. What you fear will be your reality if you let it. Believe in yourselves. Safe are the bodies of the silent world. As long as your kind cannot penetrate our world, we are safe. We will finish now. You have a lot of work to do. There is no need for you to write back, as we will have gone. Thank you for your cooperation. 2109.
When all is said and done, over 300 messages are received by Ken and Deb. Huh. Woo! Where do we go with this one? I guess it really only boils down to two choices. Either it's a hoax or it's not. So let's talk about the possibility that this whole thing is a hoax. And let's start with the obvious suspects, that Ken and Debbie staged the whole thing. There were never any signs of a break-in or that anyone else was ever in the house without them knowing about it. And at least one of them was usually in the house when the messages came in. They could have just added some poltergeist activity stories for a bit of flavor, piled up some furniture for pictures, instant haunting. Also, in the 1996 BBC television show Out of This World, which featured a segment on this case, Dr. Laura Wright, a linguistics expert from Cambridge University, said this.
Looking at the verb structure, there are things which Lucas says that would not have been said in 1546. It's true that individuals can make up individual words, but we don't make up our verbs. It's possible, or it was possible in England in 1546 to say I do, thou dost, he, she, or it doth, he, she, or it does. But it wasn't possible to say I doth, or he, she, or it dost. Now, all the way through Lucas's messages, he mixes and messes up these suffixes with the wrong subject. If it's meant to look like early modern English writing, it doesn't even look close.
Thomas should have been educated enough to know better. She also analyzed the usage of adjectives before nouns in both Thomas's messages and known writing samples from Ken. She found that Ken's adjective usage was 26.6%, while Thomas's was 26%. But writings from that period generally have a much higher usage at 32 to 35%. So it seems as though Ken and Thomas are one and the same. Or maybe it was an outside hoaxer intent on pranking Ken and Deb. If that's the case, well played, my friend. Of course, the other option is it's real. Like I said before, there were never any signs of a break-in from an outside intruder. And there were times that the messages came in when no one was home. And we have statements from Debbie's mother and brother attesting to the fact that they were at the cottage with the kitchen locked up tight so no one could go in there, sitting with Debbie in the living room when a message came in. Not to mention the 10-question test by the SPR. Their big beef was that their questions were only answered in a general sense, not one by one. But if they were answered under their own testing procedures, namely that only Dave knew the questions, not Ken and Deb, how can they claim hoax? And since the computer came from a pool of loaner computers, it would be really tough for someone to mess with the computer itself, since Ken didn't check out the same one every time. They would have to rig all of the computers. And what exactly does that mean? No one ever came up with a plausible way to rig the computer to behave the way it behaved in the first place. Not to mention, 1984, so no Wi-Fi or internet. So no direct hacking. Ken and Debbie found out later that the SPR had continued its investigation just without their knowledge. And they concluded that John Bucknell's conclusion that the computer had been tampered with was impossible. I think John Bucknell's idea was that someone was sending messages through the ground wire of the house. But even his own organization can't buy that one. And what hoaxer is going to camp out outside this cottage for 18 months waiting for their chances to sneak in and continually prank this random couple? In a tiny village like Dodleston, chances are they'll get caught by somebody. In 1989, Ken wrote his book on the whole adventure called The Vertical Plane, with an updated second edition published in 2021. The vertical plane being the way 2109 described time as happening all at once, not a two-dimensional line the way humans generally visualize it. Ken and Debbie participate in the 1996 BBC program Out of This World, but with their backs to the camera for anonymity. Other than the book, Ken pretty much stays out of the limelight. But apparently, Debbie can be occasionally spotted online. Neither of them seem to be interested in cashing in on a story that certainly has cash potential. And neither of them had anywhere close to the level of knowledge of Tudor-era English required to pull this off. According to their friend Peter Trinder, who, remember, is an expert himself on Tudor-era English literature and who also appeared on the episode of Out of This World, said the vocabulary is a mix of educated and uneducated and would be really tough to hoax.
It was very real. That's all I'm saying, Richard. It was very close. The kind of thing that you could not doubt. But all the time one was aware of the possibility of hoax. But if it was a hoax, by golly, it was brilliant.
If it's a hoax, the hoaxer would have to decide on their message, peruse the dictionary to figure out which words he could substitute to a word less common, and then go back through the dictionary again to make sure the iteration of the word is the correct iteration for the 16th century time period. Not only is this more work than the average hoaxer is most likely willing to commit to, but according to Peter, it would be impossible to do the research needed in the time frames given for many of these messages. They just wouldn't have enough time. But if you take what Peter says about the time and expertise involved, it sounds like someone would almost have to have a degree in early modern English just to have a clue as to where to start. And let's not forget about the poltergeist activity. Could a poltergeist have targeted Ken and Debbie and collected energy from their anxiety to fuel this whole escapade?
They're here.
Maybe. Certainly did manage to freak them out on more than one occasion. And many poltergeists have been documented as being a problem for multiple years, the longest covering a 12-year span. But to me, there are two things that make me kind of lean to the real category: the math and the quasar. Remember that question Dave asked 2109 about solving Fermat's last theorem? Well, 2109 didn't solve the theorem for Dave, but did tell him it would be solved sometime in his lifetime. And lo and behold, here comes Andrew Wiles in 1995 to do just that. And 2109 told Ken that there was a quasar about to happen in the Delphinus constellation. And in 2019, there was. Now, those are pretty specific things to say that could not have been known in 1984. And as a small postscript, Gary Rowe, the ufologist, did resurface after a few years and said unequivocally that he believes every word of it. Now we just need to find Thomas's book. Anyone want to volunteer to house clean Oxford University with me? Our story today starts on the Isle of Wight, a beautiful island off the southern coast of England. The island itself is about 150 square miles, but only about 20 of that is developed, leaving wide open expanses of farmland. But I guess 20 square miles of people is enough habitation, including the National Poo Museum, to become a ghost factory, because the island is well known as Ghost Central, which I guess since a Wight is a ghost, makes sense. But our story today is about an entirely different kind of weirdness. I can't even explain it. I just have to tell it. We start with two kids. Now, one note here. All of this information comes from an article in the January-February 1978 edition of the Bufora Journal, which was a magazine put out every couple of months by the British UFO Research Association. I will have a link to the original article in the description below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. And the article that this story comes from makes it very plain that they have kept the names of all of the people involved anonymous. They call the little girl Faye, and we are going to call the little boy Tom. On a Tuesday in May of 1973, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the town of Sandown, Faye is about 7 years old, and she's out with her friend Tom, who's about the same age. And they're out on the beautiful spring day seeing what they can discover. Back in the days that kids actually played outside. As they're walking along, they both hear a weird wailing noise, kind of like an ambulance siren. They follow the sound across a golf course and through a hedge leading to a swampy meadow that's right next to the Sandown airport. And the noise stops. Oh well. They start off on a new adventure. As they're crossing a wooden footbridge over a narrow little stream, a blue-gloved hand pops up from under the bridge, followed by the strangest figure the kids have ever seen. The person truly for lack of a better word, and I'm calling it a he just for simplicity's sake because really, who knows, has a book in his hands. And as he's getting up, he fumbles with the book and he drops it in the water and then kind of splashes around trying to get it back. It starts walking along with a strange hopping motion with its knees raised high. And the kids watch it go into a metallic hut, kind of like the ones that are used on building sites, except that it has no windows. The kids completely blow off this bizarre being that just crawled out from under a bridge, start moving on to their next adventure. They're about 50 yards away when the thing comes back out of his hut carrying a black knobbed microphone with a white cord attached. The wailing noise starts up again, but this time it is so loud that Tom gets scared and starts to run away, and Faye starts to follow. The noise stops, and the thing speaks into the microphone.
Hello? Are you still there?
The kids are a decent distance away by this time, but they can hear his voice like he's standing right next to them. So they stop and figure that, well, he sounds friendly enough, and they start walking back to talk to their new friend. Their friend is nearly 7 feet tall and has no neck. His head is just sitting right on his shoulders. He has a yellow pointed hat, which is connected to the red collar of his green shirt. A round black knob is attached to the top of his hat, and wooden antennae are sticking out on each side. His face has triangles for eyes, a brown square for a nose, and yellow lips that never move. Its skin, again, for lack of a better term, is paper white with round spots on his cheeks and a fringe of red hair sticking out of his hat onto his forehead. Wooden slats stick out from his sleeves and from below his white pants. I don't even know what to do with that. He pulls out his notebook in a large hand and points to a page that has several words written on it, but in no discernible order. He points to words and Faye reads them out loud.
Hello, and I am all colors Sam.
The kids get a little closer and discover that the creature can actually talk without the microphone, but his lips don't move and it's really hard to understand what he's saying, kind of like a person trying to talk without moving their lips. He asks the kids questions about themselves, so they decide to ask some questions of their own. They ask about his clothes, which are all ripped, and he tells them that he only owns one set of clothes, so that's it. And they're curious about his white skin, so they ask if he's actually a man. The thing kind of chuckles and says,
No.
Well, then what are you, a ghost? The thing cryptically replies,
Well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way.
Well, if you're not a man and you're not a ghost, then what are you? And the only answer they get is,
You know.
And that's it. He also says he doesn't have a name, but he does tell them that there are more like him though, and he draws a rough sketch of one of them. He also confesses to the kids that he's afraid of people and scared that they might hurt him, but that if he ever did get attacked, he wouldn't fight back. Now, he must have been a pretty likable character because he then invites the kids into his shack and they accept. They crawl through a flap into his hut, which is actually 2 levels. The lower level has plenty of headroom. Is that by their 4-foot standards or is that by his 7-foot standards? Is wallpapered in blue-green and covered with a pattern of dials. It also has an electric heater and simple wooden furniture. The upper level is smaller with a metallic floor. He tells the kids that he eats berries that he collects in the afternoons, and that the water from the river is actually okay to drink after he cleans it. And without giving up any kind of location, he says that he also has a camp on the mainland. Once inside the hut, he takes off his yellow hat, and the kids can see little round white ears and thin brown hair. He grabs a berry and performs what the kids can only describe as a conjuring trick. He places the berry in his ear snaps his head forward, which causes the berry to disappear from his ear and reappear by one of his eyes. Then he does it again, snaps his head, but this time the berry disappears from his eye and reappears in his mouth. Faye and Tom casually visit with this weird creature for half an hour or more, and then, after saying their goodbyes, start running back home across the golf course and tell the first man that they see that they'd seen a ghost. Of course, the guy just laughs at them, but what do you expect? It's a pretty crazy story coming from the mouths of 7-year-olds. But the kids are adamant that they'd been hanging out with either a ghost or someone dressed up. Faye doesn't tell her dad, known only as Mr. Y, about her experience until about 3 weeks later on June 2nd, 1973. And at first, understandably, he thinks the story is just her imagination. I mean, if I were Faye's mom, I'd be like, wow, honey, you're so creative. But he was amazed at all of the details in the story and Faye's absolute insistence that it was true. And she gets really upset when he kind of insinuates that he knows she's just invented the whole thing. So, Mr. Y goes to talk to Tom. Tom is not as forthcoming with information as Faye is, but Mr. Y is able to verify that Tom apparently had seen the same thing. Now, obviously, Mr. Y goes through any other possibilities in his head, like maybe the kids shared some kind of hallucination, or were the victims of a hoaxer, or just some random weirdo. He even tries to find the spot where Faye says it happened, but he can't find a metal hut anywhere in sight. Now, I think it's important to note here that the kids are very close to the Sandown airport, which naturally has a few metal hangars. And a little kid might not have the vocabulary to describe exactly what Sam's hut looked like. But if Mr. Y went looking for the hut, then presumably Faye told him exactly where to find it. And so if she points him to an area that turns out to be the airport, well, then at least that question would be answered. But it doesn't sound like the airport is the area of the incident because Mr. Y finds nothing. But there's so much detail. Like the creature had only 3 fingers on each blue-gloved hand and 3 toes on his bare white feet. Now, faking 3 fingers isn't that hard, but faking 3 toes might be a little tougher. But if it's a hoax, why go to all that trouble? And Mr. Y just can't help but feel that certain parts of Faye's story just resonate with him as being true. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have a full transcript of their conversation to get a little better idea of exactly what it is that she saw. But Mr. Y says that he got the impression that Faye was somehow taken into a bubble of alien reality created by this strange person. I mean, this, whatever it is, told the kids he had just made the hut. And Faye tells her dad that while they're talking to this ghost, 2 workmen are close by repairing a post or something. And they pay 0 attention to this weird real-life cartoon happening right in front of them, like they can't even see it. So based on his gut and his trust that he knows when his own child is lying, Faye's dad doesn't call the police. I would have. He calls the British UFO Research Association, or BUFORA. Weird, right? But not so much for him. He has a reason. 3 years prior to Faye's encounter, Faye's dad has an encounter of his own. On Tuesday, October 20th, 1970, at around 7 o'clock in the evening, Mr. Y is driving from Shanklin to Ryde with a stop in Seaview to see a friend. Passing through the village of Brading, he turns right to St. Helens and then sees a large aircraft with multiple lights to his right, about halfway between the road and Bembridge Downs, which is basically the southern coastline, only a couple of miles away. So it's about a mile from him. This thing looks huge as it's flying low over the swampy terrain. He stops the car and watches. The object is a wide ring of 7 or more red lights, each of them large, clearly defined spheres like bright red cherries, with some turquoise and white lights popping up occasionally. And it's completely silent. It looks like it's kind of aimlessly wandering over the swampy banks of the Yar River. After a while, Mr. Y gets back in his car and starts driving again. The object starts pacing him. He drives through St. Helens, and once he's on the other side, the object closes in to about 300 yards behind him and kind of slowly drops and starts just kind of meandering above the trees and the hedges, but looks a lot smaller now because now it's only 4 lights, which are slowly rotating. Mr. Y stops again and this time uses his flashlight to try to signal the object. Way braver than I am. For like 10 minutes. And that whole time, the object weaves backwards and forwards without ever stopping. Mr. Y then gets back in his car and starts driving again because he has to go meet with his friend. When he reaches his destination, the red lights are still there. So he leaves the lights on in his car so the brake lights would be on facing the object and runs to the house to get his friend. You gotta see this. Coming out of the house, his friend looks up and sees it too, kind of bobbing up and down and around the treetops. Once he's done visiting with his friend, Mr. Y gets back in his car to continue on to ride. But the lights are gone. However, over the next year and a half, there are several times when he notices single balls of red light in the sky, which would either just hang in one spot or follow him, like it's keeping an eye on him or something. But on March 1st, 1972, a considerably more exciting or terrifying incident occurs. It's somewhere between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening, and Mr. Y is perched on some rocks at Compton Bay. He was walking along close to the water's edge when a sudden surprise surge of water, like a tidal surge, raises the water level so fast that he had to scramble to the rocks to avoid getting caught in it. As he's looking around, wondering what the hell am I going to do now, he looks out into the channel and sees what looks like some kind of craft just under the surface of the water. From his vantage point, he sees 2 points of yellow light that look like the eyes of some horrible sea monster staring at him. The eyes, the lights on the craft, are about 40 feet away and are just below the surface of the water, kind of like a periscope. The lights and the craft disappear, and as the water level gradually goes back down to normal, Mr. Y is able to get back to his car and drive home. So, knowing that UFO experiences often run generationally in families, and knowing that at no time did he ever tell Faye about anything that he'd experienced, Mr. Y is inclined to think that his daughter has indeed experienced something beyond just a weirdo in a clown suit. So he calls Bufora and reports everything that happened to both of them, thus planting the seed of what would grow into the legend of Sam, the Sandown Clown. Let's just say you're getting ready to move into a new place. You go to buy supplies, and the total is $66.60. The car that almost hits you when you're getting your new furniture has a license plate of BST 666. And the stop you make for your last meal before moving in comes to a grand total of $6.66. Would you take the hint? I probably wouldn't either. And neither did Bill and Liz Rich. It's the spring of 1989, just outside the southern Welsh city of Brecon, in the foothills of the Brecon Beacon mountain range, in the shadows of Penavon, the highest peak in southern Wales. The Rich family Bill, Liz, and Bill's 14-year-old son Lawrence from a previous marriage pull off of the winding, narrow road onto the driveway of their new house. Well, rented, known as Hale Fennog, or Road to the Peaks. They get out of the car and start walking toward the house, which is actually the renovated barn of the former manor house that once stood on the property but was now reduced to crumbling stone outlines. All three of them can physically feel a bubble of peace envelop them, separating them from the outside world. This is exactly the fresh start, not to mention the peace and quiet they are looking for. The road for these three has not been easy to this point. Bill, who had spent a number of years traveling the world trying to find himself, finally married and settled down with his wife, and soon thereafter, Lawrence. But after 16 years of marriage, his wife left him for someone else, leaving him to figure out how to be both parents to Lawrence. Liz also had a pretty rebellious youth, including wandering the Mediterranean for years looking for a fix for her decade-long affliction of anorexia. Both wayward souls found their separate ways back to Wales, where Bill stumbled into Liz's herbalist shop looking for a natural treatment for his depression. That was it. They both found what they were looking for in each other, and Liz's anorexia disappeared. So life has taken an upward turn for both of them, but they still have their struggles. Liz moves in with Bill, but they have a bunch of Karen neighbors that make life difficult. Bill is worried about Lawrence adjusting to losing his mom and Liz moving in, and Bill and Liz decide to get married. Oh, and Liz gets pregnant. So everything's kind of a hot mess. But Bill is an up-and-coming artist who has a very good business selling these painted wooden boxes, as well as having some of his paintings attracting attention in the international art world. He even has a few paintings getting ready to be shown in an art exhibition in LA, whose attendees are set to be the likes of Sylvester Stallone. Money is good, so they start searching for a new place. And within just a couple of weeks, they stumble onto Hale Fennog. It's perfect. 3 acres of land, a big house and barn, room for a huge studio for Bill, quiet, and no neighbors. Done. And life is good. For a while. The summer is spent getting settled in their new home. Bill and Liz get married in September, and their baby boy Ben is born in October. But November is when life changed. Bill and Liz are up late doing what newlyweds do. Bill then heads down the stairs from the second floor to the bathroom on the first. As he's in there, he's startled by the banging of what sounds like someone running down the upstairs hallway in hobnail boots. Hobnail boots are boots that have thick-headed nails in the bottom for durability. So you can imagine how loud that sounded. Immediately, Bill thinks, oh, Lawrence must have heard Liz and I, and he's throwing a fit. He steels himself for the discussion he is about to have with his son when he peeks in his room to find Lawrence fast asleep. It wasn't Lawrence. Then who was it? And when he got to the bedroom where Liz was up nursing Ben, he asks her about it, and she hasn't heard a thing. But they will both tell you that from the instant Bill hears those footsteps, everything changes. The next morning, the house just feels cold and claustrophobic. Lawrence comes thundering down the stairs to Bill and Liz in the kitchen with a scowl on his face. Bill asks him, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "Well, it doesn't look like nothing." "I said nothing's wrong." "Okay, that's certainly not the happy-go-lucky kid they had yesterday. But okay, he's a teenager going through a lot of changes. Whatever." Still trying to figure out exactly what he heard the night before, Bill opens the electric bill and can't quite believe what he sees. The bill for the quarter, so the previous 3 months, is £750. That's like $3,000 in today's US dollars. Holy crap, that's like pot farm levels. But Bill and Liz did not have a pot farm. They didn't even have a regular farm. They have a pig and a couple of goats, but that hardly qualifies. They have no idea why the bill would be that high. And from that moment on, anything that could go wrong did. Over the next several months, all of those orders Bill had for his painted wooden boxes were inexplicably canceled. Their car battery would go dead overnight for no reason. The gallery in LA that was set to show Bill's paintings went under, causing his paintings to be held until proper ownership could be established, a process that could take years. And not only are they still hearing those same invisible boots running down the hallway, but now they also hear invisible slippers padding their way down the stairs. The temperature in the house is totally unpredictable. Some days the house is so hot that Liz has sweat running down her face. She tells Bill to turn the heat down, and Bill says the heat's not on. Other times it's just the opposite, where she's so cold she's shivering. They both experience sudden odors, either of sulfur or incense, so strong that they feel like they're gonna vomit. And then they seemingly evaporate as fast as they came. And it feels to everyone that they are not the only ones living in their house. One day, Bill is in his studio and Liz is in the bedroom with Ben when she hears a door slam. Was that Bill? Then she hears the next door slam, and then the next door slam. The next door is the one to the room she is in. Sure enough, Liz jumps as she hears the door to her room slam as well. Except the door was already closed and it had never opened. Everybody's nerves are wearing thin and Lawrence is going downhill fast. He'd been telling Bill for a while that he wanted to paint his room, make it his own space. So one day, Bill gives him some money and says, "Knock yourself out." Lawrence picks out his paint and paints his room all by himself. However, Bill and Liz are a little dismayed to discover that his room is now a blood red color. Bill still thinks Lawrence is acting out to the new family changes, so he buys him a little present, a TV VCR combo for his bedroom. Big mistake, because now Bill and Liz are kept up at night by the screams of horror movies at full volume all night long. And any suggestion that maybe he at least turned down the volume is met with the proverbial hand. But the biggest thing that breaks Bill's heart is seeing the physical changes to his son's face. Lawrence's cheeks are sinking in and his eyes have dark circles under them. Bill barely recognizes the face he now sees as his own kid. Bill's mom comes to stay with them for a weekend. After she's been there for a bit, they hear Lawrence coming out of his room, which is a pretty rare affair these days. He even eats his dinner in there most nights. So Grandma gets up and wanders over to the stairway to say hi. Lawrence yells, "Get away from me!" Grandma looks like she's been slapped in the face and just says, "Lawrence." Lawrence tells his grandmother to F off, spits in her face, and starts heading back to his room. Bill pushes past his mother on the staircase and shouts at Lawrence to apologize, at which point Lawrence tells him to F off and spits in his face too, heads back to his room, and slams the door. Bill is shocked, not only by his son's behavior, but by the realization that that was not his son. Liz says, "We need help." She contacts the landlord, Phil Holborn, and asks him if anything strange has ever been reported in the house. He says no. She contacts the former tenant that was there right before them, Bridget Buscombe, who tells Liz, "Well, I saw a spinning wheel spinning by itself once, but I didn't really think much of it. I loved it there." They bring in a Catholic priest who goes around and blesses every room. Much to Bill and Liz's relief, the house just feels better, but only for a couple of days. And one day, when Liz is coming back from taking Ben for a walk, which she does as often as she can since she figured out that the further away from the house she is, the better she feels. Somehow, their bubble of peace has become a prison of nightmares. As she comes up the driveway, she glances up at the windows of the house and sees an old woman standing there, looking none too happy. When Liz tells Bill what she saw, Bill says, "All of this is because of the ghost of some old lady?" Liz says, "Nope, she's here, but this isn't her doing." Not long after that, the Riches start having some plumbing issues. The floor under the toilet is heaving and making the toilet loose. Bill calls a plumber. Of course, the floor goes back to normal right before he gets there. Plumber can't find anything wrong, so he reseats the toilet and leaves. But the floor heaves again, so Bill calls the plumber again. And the plumber says, "Ugh, I thought I was done with that place." Turns out that he's the same guy that had installed the radiator heating system back in the 60s when the current landlord's mother, Marion, was living there. The plumber finishes the radiator job, but is called back the next day by the old lady yelling at him to come back because all of the radiators have come loose. He comes back, has no idea how they could even come off, but dutifully tightens them all back on. The next day, he gets the same call and goes back again. The same thing happens for a number of days in a row until the plumber has an idea and decides to use different screws to reinstall the radiators. This time, he uses a cruciform screw, which was the name for the crosshead screw known today as a Phillips screw before Henry Phillips bought the rights to the design. And it worked. The radiators never came loose again. Not long after that, Bill is rearranging some stacks of furniture left in his studio by the landlord for storage when he finds a faded old picture of an elderly woman. He shows the picture to Liz, whose face goes pale. That's her. That's the old woman. It's a picture of Marion, the landlord's mother. Bill decides to do an interview with the local newspaper. As soon as it hits the stands, he gets a call from a guy who worked on the house back in the 50s when it was converted from a barn to a house. Saying it without saying it, he implies that the small family graveyard on the property had maybe been disturbed. Maybe that was their issue. And then there's the morning that Bill wakes up Liz in a total panic. She says, "What's wrong?" And Bill shows her his hands. Overnight, his fingertips have become swollen. The skin is cracking and bleeding. He can't even hold a paintbrush. He can't paint. Bill is crushed. Now, it's personal. He feels like whatever this thing is, it's trying to not only take away the one thing that has been keeping him sane these past few months, but also taking away his ability to make his living, as meager as it is. Meanwhile, a fight with the electric company is brewing. After that first hellacious bill called the company saying there must be some kind of mistake. There's no way we use this much electricity. The response from the electric company is, "You're right, that is really high, but there's no mistake, so you still have to pay it." After a few more lively phone calls, the electric company sends someone out to check the line to the meter. Everything checks out fine. So again, the electric company says, "Our meter is fine. So the problem is in your house, which is your responsibility. Pay up." Bill hires energy consultants to come out and take a look at all of their appliances. They all check out fine, but the outrageously high bills keep coming. Add to all of this, all of their animals start to die. The pig gets sick and has to be put down. Lawrence's guinea pig dies, and their goat, who has 2 kids, accidentally crushes one of them. Liz's next call brings in Ray Williams of the Christian Spiritualist Church in Cardiff. His opinion is that Lawrence needs to be removed from the house. Either he's the center of the poltergeist activity, or if he's not, this is not a healthy environment for a kid to grow up in. Liz breaks the news to Bill, who's crushed by the idea of sending his son away, and she adds, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant." Ray Williams comes by to see the house and has a couple of mediums with him, one by the name of Larry Harry. I only mention him because I think that name is hilarious. They cleanse the house, which seems to do nothing. The two mediums come back, and they tell the Riches that they sense 4 entities on the farm, the ghosts of 2 men and an old woman that are trapped there, and some other entity that doesn't want to go. But don't worry, at least they set the 3 trapped spirits free. That didn't seem to work either. One day, Mr. Harry comes back again with another medium and tells Bill they're going to build a psychic wall of protection around the house. They walk around the house for about a half hour and say, it's done. Almost immediately, Bill and Liz can feel the difference in the house. It's brighter, feels bigger. The next few days are a dream, with Bill's fingers healing overnight, and their neighbor commissions Bill to paint a portrait of their prize horse, Echo. Fantastic! The only hard part was saying goodbye to Lawrence. The boarding school they found for him was right there in Brecon, so they could visit whenever they wanted to, but that didn't really make it any easier. But to keep his mind off of all of that, Bill dove into the horse painting project. The neighbors had given him a picture of the horse, but Bill went out one day looking over the neighbors' fields, looking for the perfect background to put behind him. He finds the perfect spot with the mountains in the back and sits down to sketch it out. As he's sitting there, another neighbor comes by, starts chatting. Turns out all of the farms in the area are all suffering from a blanket of bad luck. All the livestock that's been born lately were either all deformed or blind or deaf or dead. And Bill asked him, when did all of this start? Turns out the first deformed calf was born the day after Larry Harry and his friend had erected the protective psychic wall around Bill's house. Huh. So it's like the negativity and bad mojo they had been experiencing had now been pushed out to everyone else. Bill keeps working on the horse painting and is more than satisfied at how it's coming along, with the exception of the horse's right rear leg. No matter how many times Bill starts it over, it keeps coming out looking deformed. He finally gives up, making it look as good as he can, and delivers the painting. The neighbors are thrilled. Not long after, Liz gets a call from the neighbor's wife. Now, keep in mind that the neighbors are aware of some funky things that are going down at Hale Fennig. Maybe not the full extent, but they know something's going on. So the neighbor's wife calls to let them know that their horse had contracted an infection of its right rear leg, making it look exactly as deformed as it looked in the painting, and they had to put it down. They buried the horse right where it fell, which happened to be in the exact same spot in which Bill had painted it. Barely able to hide her insinuation that the curse of Hale Fennig, and by extension Bill, had killed their horse, she let Liz know that they burned Bill's painting. Several weeks of peace later, so around August of 1990, a brutal storm seems to wash away their wall of protection. The house goes from completely peaceful to 100% ominous. The thing is back. What follows is a string of people, religious and secular, all trying to help the Riches rid their home of this dark energy. Sometimes nothing changes, but sometimes things would be better for a while. One man, David Holmwood, even managed to exorcise the evil presence for almost 2 years. And as awesome as that felt for the Riches, they still knew deep inside that it wasn't really gone. They could feel whatever this thing is simmering in the dark recesses, waiting. And just so you know, their power bill is still off the charts. And as usual, the peace does not last. And as time plods on, the electricity in the house is not the only thing draining away. So is Bill's creativity and inspiration to paint. Seeing the proverbial writing on the wall, he knows he has to make a choice between putting his time and energy into his life's passion or into standing with his wife to protect their family. He can't do both. The choice really isn't all that hard, but like the loss of any good friend, Bill grieves the loss of this huge chunk of who he is and is angry for having to make the choice to begin with. In his anger and frustration, he grabs one of his older paintings and starts covering over it in a frenzy of sadness and frustration. After 20 minutes of blind emotion guiding the paintbrush, covering the canvas in dark, vibrant colors, Bill is finished, both emotionally as well as with the painting. He sits back to see what the result is, only to be shocked at what he sees. In a sea of dark hues in turmoil, a bright white cross dominates the color storm. And for the first time in a long time, Bill sees just a flicker of light at the end of his tunnel. He names the painting Testimony. Throughout this entire ordeal, Bill and Liz just kept talking to people, going to the library and collecting any information they could find about the history of the property. One interesting thing they dug up is that in 1898, there was a murder. 23-year-old Thomas Edwards was hanged for taking an axe to the back of the head of one 18-year-old James Griffith. James's body was found buried in a muck heap, a stone's throw away at the farm at Cumgoody, where they both worked as farmhands. But some say the actual murder happened at Hale Fannig. There are suggestions that it was a fight over money or a beef over a farmer's daughter. There's a surprise. But there is also the persistent legend that James was taken out because he witnessed some kind of ceremony of the dark arts variety. And supposedly, Thomas was told by someone in said dark arts ring that if he committed this murder, he would be taken care of. And that Thomas believed until the very moment the noose is tightened around his neck that someone was going to step forward with an alibi or something to stop this whole execution thing. But no one did. Maybe Thomas misunderstood what was meant by him being taken care of. Another interesting tidbit that comes to light comes from the local vet/animal control officer called the dog warden. The Riches had decided to try their luck with animals one more time and get a Doberman puppy named Bo, both for the kids, of which they now had 2, and the third one was due soon, and for protection. At first, the puppy was your regular puppy, but soon it was reduced to shaking and crying in its spot in the corner, obviously terrified of something. So the Riches called Liz Jones, the dog warden, to come and take a look at Bo just to make sure that nothing's wrong with him. After pronouncing Bo fit as a fiddle and admitting she has no idea what's causing his behavior, she confesses to the Riches that she almost didn't come. She never wanted to set foot on this property again. Turns out she's friends with Bridget Buscombe, the previous tenant of Hale Fannig, the girl who really didn't think anything of her spinning wheel. Well, Bridget has to go out of town, so she asks Liz Jones to take care of her animals for her. Liz says no problem and starts going to Hale Fannig every day to feed the animals. And guess what? She heard the clomping boots running down the hallway too. More than once. She doesn't find anything wrong with Bo, so Bill takes him to the local vet, who also can't find anything wrong. But as soon as they get home, Bo takes his regular spot, crying, shaking, and whimpering. Now, I know we have a lot of animal lovers watching whose hearts are breaking for poor Bo, but I have to digress for just a moment and talk about one of the actual good things to come out of this whole ordeal. Bill and Liz had both been spiritual people before 1989, but their faith was just not really in the foreground of their day-to-day lives. However, as the months and years of mental and physical torture tick by, not only do they figure out that they are stronger together than alone, but they discover that they are stronger with God than without Him, and are eventually baptized into the Baptist faith. So here's Bill laying on the floor with his face next to Bo's, trying to comfort the poor terrified puppy when inspiration strikes. He lays his hand on Bo's head and says, "Jesus, whatever is bothering this dog, take his fear away." With that, Bo stops shaking and whimpering and falls into a deep sleep he hasn't had in days, maybe even weeks, and is bothered no more. By now, the Riches had been given the name of another person who might be able to help them. David Holmwood has done a good job helping them keep the monsters at bay for a long time, but the Riches needed someone to get rid of it once and for all. Enter one Eddie Burke. Eddie had come to prominence in the paranormal world recently when word got out that he cleared a haunted bank. Now he wants to help the Riches, but he also wants to bring a documentary crew. So the Riches tell him, "We're gonna have to think about that one." They really weren't sure that they wanted to invite that kind of publicity. And Eddie was not a Christian. All of their Christian friends tell the Riches to stay away from him. But one friend steps up and tells them to give Eddie a shot. Why not? No one else has been able to get rid of this thing. The Riches certainly are in full-on desperation mode at this point. The activity is more pervasive than it has ever been, with something unusually happening almost every day. And it comes in waves, ramping up like someone turning up the voltage. When it's at its worst, it even affects their children, who become much grumpier and harder to put to bed at night. But then something usually happens, like seeing the old woman in the children's rooms, that drains that pent-up charge, dissipating the oppressive atmosphere for a while. But only for a while. Whatever it is, it's angry. The Riches decide to accept Eddie Burke's offer of help, but getting everything coordinated takes some time. The waiting is especially hard for Bill. He is about as low as he can go right now. His physical energy is draining away. Bills are piling up with no income in sight. He no longer has his painting as a refuge, and their third child has just been born, bringing with it all kinds of new pressures of taking care of the other two so Liz can concentrate on the new one. And just like they did when their second child was born, they had both of their mothers come to stay for help and support. But this house has a way of pulling out the worst in people. And just like the first time, perfectly cordial in-laws devolved into arguing, unhelpful distractions. So the Riches sent them home. One night, as Bill sits alone at the kitchen table, trying to comprehend how they had even gotten to this place, he looks up to notice one of their big, sharp kitchen knives sitting next to his arm on the table. Immediately, he's ticked off. He and Liz are always careful to make sure they put it back in the drawer so the little ones can't get their little fingers on it. Obviously, Liz must have left it out. How irresponsible can you get? He gets up, grabs the knife to put it back in the drawer, and a sudden thought rushes into his head. What would it feel like to run that blade over his wrist? He shoves the knife in the drawer, closes his eyes, and tries to shove the thoughts of death out of his head. But the thoughts don't want to go away. Think of how easy it would be No more pressure, no more problems, just peace. He tries to flood his head with positive images of Liz and his children, but the dark thoughts keep winning. He opens his eyes again, and there's the knife, the one he had just put away in the drawer. Come on, it'll be over in an instant. You won't feel a thing. Bill lashes out, knocking the knife to the floor. When Liz comes through the door to see what happened, she finds Bill on his knees on the floor with tears in his eyes. Bill says, "This house wants us, and if we don't do something soon, I'm afraid it's going to get us." By the time Eddie arrives, it's March of 1993. Now, he's not really your typical ghost hunter or medium. An experience as a child got him to thinking that maybe there's more to this life than we know, but he spent his adult life as a principal science officer for the civil service. Pretty no nonsense. But then in 1970, his wife dies of a heart attack and appears to him, causing him to look more toward what we can feel than what we can see. As he sits down with friends to discuss the happenings at Hale Fennog, Eddie suddenly feels information coming through to him, telling him there is much confusion at this place. Many layers of influence, some of which are unpleasant, and that he needs to keep his mind open and his senses sharp. When Eddie, with the help of his friend, Captain Ferguson Cunningham, get to the house, Eddie follows the instructions coming to him by the guides who promised to help him. He lays down a barrier of light around the property's perimeter and another around the house itself. Eddie tells Bill that there is a concentration of energy here, and it's not friendly. But he can see that the house is filling with light. He can sense the presence of Christ and hears the words, "And there will be nowhere left for them to go. The light shall prevail." Eddie asks Bill if there's some cross of significance nearby, as he's also hearing, "And so I shall leave my mark and my protection upon this place." Bill stops for a moment and smiles knowingly and leads the man into the house where his last painting, Testimony, hangs on the living room wall. Bill's mind is blown. All this time, he saw the cross in his painting as the hope of Christ swimming in a sea of evil. But instead, this whole time, it's been the image of God's defeat of evil. The day after Eddie's visit, the ever-spinning electric meter starts to slow down. Something's working! Eddie warns them that the activity and cleansing that has taken place at Hale Fennog is now going to become a beacon for other souls looking for the light. So don't be surprised if you start seeing more apparitions. And they do, but none of them give off any ill intent vibes. Instead, it's like they're all just passing through the house on their way to somewhere else. Not exactly the result they were looking for, but better than evil. The house is bright and happy again, and Bill's son, Lawrence, who pretty much did a 180 after getting out of that house, comes over to play with his brothers and sister on a regular basis, and laughter fills every space. But Bill and Liz can feel that things are not quite right. Somewhere in the flurry of vicars and mediums, someone had managed to release Marion's spirit. And Eddie says he was able to release the spirits of both the murderer and his victim, the two male spirits that were there. Whatever that last dark force is, it's not quite gone. And the electric meter starts to spin faster. Now, before you come to any conclusions about this last entity being an actual demon, there are a couple more avenues to consider. Way back, when Bill and Liz had just become an item, young Lawrence was fascinated with Egypt. So the three took a bonding vacation to Egypt, including a tour of the Pyramid of Cheops, the largest of the 3 pyramids of Giza. They all got up really early to beat not only the heat of the day, but the other tourists as well. And it worked. They were the only ones around when they started up the dark passageways that led to the burial chamber. Once they get in the chamber, Liz can see these flashes of light within the rocks, like laser lights. And she asks the boys, "You see that?" And both boys say, "See what?" But then they all feel a presence enter the room with them. Totally creeped out and feeling like they're all in danger, they all take off running out of the chamber through the tunnels and don't stop until they are outside in the sunshine again. And Liz would later report seeing those same flashing lights again in their barn. But the Egyptites don't stop there. As the encounters in their house were at their highest levels, both Bill and Liz saw an entity that they both describe as being about 7 feet tall, all black, with the head of a bird, closely resembling pictures and statues of the Egyptian god Horus. And Liz's mother, whom the Riches would stay with occasionally when they needed a few days away from the farm, found a pendant on her living room floor that looked strangely Egyptian. It wasn't hers. Knowing they had been to Egypt, she assumed it was a souvenir of Liz's and handed it to her. "Here, I found your pendant." But neither Liz nor Bill had ever seen it before. Liz hands it to Bill, who immediately drops it on the carpet after getting hit with what felt like an electrical surge through his arm. Bill takes the pendant outside and smashes it with a hammer. So maybe the family accidentally brought back some kind of spirit from the ancient tomb of Cheops. But there is still one more avenue to explore: ley lines. During the parade of interested parties that waltzed through Heal Vanek over the 6-year ordeal, many were searching for ley lines. A ley line is a theoretical line of energy that flows through the earth. And if you check out a ley line map, you'll see that many churches and ancient monuments have been erected on these lines. What I didn't know is that these lines are said to either follow or are created by underground rivers, and the energy emitted can either be positive or negative. So dowsers, people who are skilled at detecting underground water and minerals, can also detect these energy channels. And according to them, Heal Vanek is sitting on more than one negative energy river.
You know how much negative energy it must have taken to generate a flow this size? Hey.
And they all said, "I wouldn't live here." So do the negative entities come from the energy of those negative energy ley lines? Or are they just attracted to the negative energy signatures they radiate? Very good question. But I gotta say, I have a hard time with the whole ley line idea. Every time I try to compare maps, nobody's map is the same. Not helpful. But no matter where the dark energy came from originally, it's pretty evident that it's now entrenched in Heal Vanek. Eddie pays the farm another visit. And as he's getting in touch with the dark presence, which he describes as something without form, without personality, something very ancient, the oppression in the room ramps up. He describes the force as something primitive, possibly a force summoned by early pagans who did not understand the power they were messing with. As Eddie is dealing with that entity, the tape recorder that had been set up and turned on in the corner suddenly lets out this loud crack, like it's been struck by lightning or something, and stops. The oppression that filled the room is gone. Since Eddie's second visit to Heal Vanek, there has been no reports of any strange phenomena at the farm. And the electricity bill is now below the average for a house that size. I wish I could say, and they all lived happily ever after, but I can't. In the aftermath, it seems as if the dark force had just taken too much from Bill, who turned to alcohol to try and erase the memories. After leaving Hale Fenag, now nicknamed Hellfire Farm or the Welsh Amityville, Bill and Liz divorced, and Bill passed away in 2016. One of Bill's biggest fears is that the house would get them. Looks like in the end, it did. Grant is a full-time park ranger for the British National Trust. Established almost 130 years ago, the National Trust is the largest heritage conservation society in the United Kingdom, and its job is to look after places of historic significance or natural beauty across the country. And this includes everything from historic houses and buildings to national parks. And since Grant grew up in County Down in Northern Ireland, his career as a park ranger inevitably saw him posted to the Mourne Mountains. The Mourne Mountains actually include a few different forests and parks that come together under the jurisdiction of the National Trust. But since they're all in an area that's only about 50 miles across, they're all under the domain of Grant's team. And not only has he been a ranger in the area for years, but he was born and raised just north in the town of Lurgan and also did his training around the Mourne too. He knew that area like the back of his hand. So by the time he actually becomes a ranger, everyone on his team knows that he is the go-to guy for expert advice on the Mourne Mountain terrain, which is how he ends up getting a phone call early one morning from a colleague, let's call her Julie, in need of assistance. Julie had gotten a call from someone she described as a very upset camper who'd woken up at dawn to find a couple of dead sheep outside of his tent. And since it's oddly not all that uncommon for sheep to turn up dead for a multitude of reasons, Grant didn't really think a whole lot about it. Julie calls Grant because she needs his help to actually find the guy's campsite. Grant says, well, sure, but why can't the guy just lead you there himself? Julie says, it's not that he can't go back, it's that he won't go back. He is terrified. This really piques Grant's interest. Waking up to dead sheep in front of your tent wouldn't be how most people would choose to wake up, but he doesn't understand why the camper is so afraid. So afraid that he refuses to even go back to the campsite and pack up his stuff. Wow. So Grant starts off to try to find this guy's campsite. And Julie gave him a vague idea of where the camper spent the night, enough for a rough starting point, but this guy didn't pitch his tent at a marked campsite. That would have been way easier. This guy decided to go wild camping, or rambling as some people call it, basically pitching a tent in the middle of nowhere, which means there's very little to go on in terms of location aside of, near such and such's field. As Grant's driving around, he gets Julie back on the phone again, who's still with the terrified camper down at the Mourne Country Park office. And he basically says, I'm gonna need more to go on. The camper says, after waking up to that horrific scene, he basically just ran all the way from his campsite to the Mourne Country Park. That's about 7 miles. And Grant asks, why didn't he just call somebody from his campsite? But the camper said he'd been so terrified that he didn't bother to grab anything before running for his life. At this point, as he's driving around on speakerphone, Grant starts wondering just how many dead sheep it takes to scare somebody who's apparently well into middle age. This guy isn't some scared kid. He sounds older than Grant. So Grant tells Julie, ask him exactly how many dead sheep were outside his tent. The reply came back, he doesn't know. The guy can't even guess. He only adds, it's a mess up there, and that Grant should take a gun of some kind with him if he's going to be the one investigating. And Grant only overheard that last part because Julie didn't even think it was worth repeating. Being a park ranger in Ireland is way different than being a park ranger in America. National park staff in Ireland never carry guns and don't even have any access to them. They just don't have any really kind of crazy wildlife that would require that kind of protection. So some guy saying that he needs to take a gun with him just sounds like insanity. Grant finally ends up talking to the camper directly and says, I need you to describe your campsite to the best of your ability, every detail. And the camper tries his best, but nothing in his description clicks with Grant until he mentioned how on his first day he walked past a large body of water that was kind of in a C shape. And Grant thinks for a moment. The only large reservoir in the Mournes shaped like that is the Spelga Dam. The camper says he pitched his tent only 5 or 10 minutes away from the water. Bingo. That narrows the search quite a bit. Then Grant starts thinking, if I were to camp near Spelga, where would I go? And he decides to drive over and check out the only 2 places that come to mind. Now, the first one is a dud, but the second one is a direct hit. Grant can see a bright red tent sitting inside the tree line up ahead. The camper had chosen to camp among some trees, meaning that Grant can't see much from a distance, dead sheep included. So he starts trudging across a muddy field and hops a fence before he finally gets a good look at what has terrified the camper. And wouldn't you know it, it terrifies Grant too. From what he can see, the reason why the man couldn't tell the number of dead sheep is because there are bits and pieces of wool, flesh, and bone strewn all over the campsite. It shakes Grant to his core. He has never seen anything like it, not just during his ranger career, but ever. He has to count the sheep's skulls, or at least what he guesses are the remains of the skulls, to get an accurate number. 4. He counted 4 eviscerated sheep around that man's campsite. No wonder he'd been so terrified. Imagine opening your eyes in the morning, seeing the morning sun shining through the tent walls, having a good stretch before crawling out of your sleeping bag and unzipping your tent, only to see blood and bones and guts everywhere. Grant considers himself quite hardy when it comes to things of this nature. But good Lord, even he was having a bit of a problem with the grisly display in front of him. Grant then contacts another ranger and tells them exactly where the campsite is and asks them to lock the place down so they can secure the scene. It may seem kind of like overkill going all CSI on a few sheep, but in this case, they have to do something to preserve the evidence. It's the only chance they're going to have to figure out what happened. Now, once Grant knows that that is in the works, he starts heading back to Mourne Country House, where there's a little porta cabin in the parking lot that serves as the ranger station office. Time for a serious chat with the frightened camper. When he arrives, the guy's still freaked out, so he starts asking the guy some questions. But he goes pretty easy on him since he figures out that he'll get most of what he really needs to know from the scene itself. But he has to ask, how did you not wake up? Obviously, the camper doesn't know what to say. So Grant asks him, are you a heavy sleeper? And the camper says, I don't think so, but I think this is some kind of warning. Grant says, why? Did you piss somebody off? But again, he says, I don't think so. Well, since he wasn't getting anything useful from the camper, Grant thought he'd just move on to the next task at hand, figuring out who is missing sheep. It is certainly possible that 4 sheep had staged a prison break, gone out on the run, and been taken out by a dog or a couple of foxes. Stranger things have happened around there, but not many as strange as the way his day was shaping up. It actually didn't take Grant long to find the farm where the 4 missing sheep had come from. So he drives over to have a word with the farmer and to check the guy's fences. Now, we're already at weird with the dead sheep stew on the camper's front lawn. But this next part is where the whole story takes a hard left toward Freaky Town. The farmer tells Grant that 4 of his sheep had indeed gone missing from the farm, but not all last night. Over the past 2 weeks, one would just disappear randomly every couple of nights. In fact, the farmer says, "Please check the fences. Be my guest. I have been beefing them up for the last 2 weeks, but I can't figure out how they're getting out." Grant is in no way a sheep fencing expert, but he gives the fences a check anyway. And just like the farmer had said, he'd turned the place into a Fort Knox of wood stakes and chicken wire. After Grant gives him the nod on his handiwork, the farmer says, "I think someone's stealing them. But for the life of me, I can't figure out how." A sheep going missing is an irritatingly common occurrence. But 4 sheep going missing over the course of 2 weeks, then all turning up in the exact same location, looking like they'd each swallowed a hand grenade? You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know that something odd is going on. But they never figured out what. The campsite is cleaned up, and a wildlife expert stops by and tells Grant that the sheep were too shredded to properly analyze. They would never know if it was an animal or a person that had done those horrible things. When the farmer heard exactly how his sheep had died, he wanted an investigation into the camper for animal cruelty. Can't really blame him, but 4 dead sheep don't really make a big blip on the local police's radar. And the camper was in the wind, so there was no arresting or questioning him. And the Park Service has enough on its plate without having to investigate sheep murders. But still, Grant is mystified. There's obviously something more to the whole thing, yet everyone but him and a handful of his fellow rangers either don't know enough or don't care enough to actually investigate properly. Everyone up the ranger chain of command wants to chalk it up to a spike in the local fox population. But no one who actually witnessed the carnage up at that campsite would be dumb enough to claim that foxes did that. The only real feedback or reaction they got from the National Trust was, "Keep an eye out for any large escaped dogs and any other such predators." They all found that last part a bit scary, but it made no difference in the end. There was no hellhound type creature romping around the Mourne Mountains, but no investigation meant that they would never figure out what was. Of all the things that Grant has seen or experienced during his time working for the National Trust, the incident with the dead sheep is the one thing that still sends shivers down his spine. But it's not what he knows about it that scares him. It's what he doesn't know that keeps him up at night. The Pennine region in England, between Lancashire and Yorkshire, is commonly referred to as UFO Valley, which means absolutely nothing to Ziggy Adamsky. Not only does it have no bearing on her day-to-day life, but especially now that she is too busy worrying about her husband, Zygmunt, who's been missing for 12 days. But the person about to knock on her door will change her world forever. Leocadia, or Lottie as she is known, is beside herself. She's a wreck with worry today. Her husband of 29 years, Zygmunt, or Ziggy, has been missing for 12 days now. He went out for a bag of potatoes and never came home. And there might be a joke in there somewhere if she didn't feel like her world was crashing down around her. Lottie and Ziggy are Polish immigrants who, after both having nasty run-ins with the Nazis after they invaded Poland in 1939, fled to the Leeds area of the UK. Eventually, they met and were married in 1951. And since they both have had enough drama in Poland, they settled down in the small town of Tingley, just outside of Leeds, to build themselves a nice, quiet life together. And they do a pretty good job of it. Ziggy gets a good, stable job at the coal mine that supports them both. But life is not life without some drama. Since they moved to Tingley, Lottie was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and is now in a wheelchair. But they've managed to build a good community of friends and family and are both well liked by everybody. Ziggy and Lottie are never able to have any children of their own. So instead, Ziggy kind of leans into his relationship with his goddaughter, and the two become pretty close. So close that Ziggy is set to walk her down the aisle for her upcoming wedding. But then it happened. The day before the wedding, Lottie will never forget that day, June 6th, 1980, when her world stopped. Ziggy went shopping that morning with his cousin Laska, who had been staying with them for a couple of months. After the two came home and had lunch with Lottie, Ziggy gets up from the table and announces that he's running down the street because he forgot to buy the potatoes that they're going to need for the next day's festivities. He grabs his striped coat and his wallet and heads out the door. He walks to the store, buys his bag of potatoes, and starts heading back to home, but stops to chat with the neighbors for a few minutes. And that is the last time anyone has seen Ziggy in the last 12 days. The grocery store is like a whole 3 blocks down the road. So to walk there, buy potatoes, and walk back should have taken all of 15-20 minutes max. So after half an hour, Lottie sends Laska out to see what the problem is. But Ziggy is nowhere. Lottie starts calling everyone she can think of and raising the alarm that something is wrong, including calling the police. The police tell her to just sit tight for a day or two and just see what happens. Surely he will be back in time for the wedding. But he wasn't. So she files a missing persons report, and the police start checking around a bit, talking to family, friends, and neighbors. And they talk to one of Ziggy's closest friends, Christopher Solinsky, who'd been out at the pub with Ziggy just 2 days before he disappeared. He told police that Ziggy seemed like his normal, cheery self. He described the Adamskys' marriage as happy and said that there's no way that Ziggy would voluntarily disappear and leave his wheelchair-bound wife, Lottie, to fend for herself. No way. But so far, no one has either seen or heard a thing. No leads, no theories, nothing. He's just gone. So Lottie has done nothing for these last 12 days except sit in her chair and pray that God will return her Ziggy. Then, a knock at the door. A young man who was visiting Lottie gets up and answers the door for her. Standing on her front steps are a detective and police constable Alan Godfrey. The 2 officers come in and inform Lottie that they are there because they heard she had filed a missing persons report about her husband. They had some pictures to show her. Pictures, it turns out, of Ziggy. 7 days earlier, on June 11th, Alan Godfrey is standing on a stoop, having a smoke and trying to stay out of the rain, when a call comes on his radio asking officers to respond to an incident at the Tomlinson coal yard. I'm on my way. What's going on?
The body's been found.
As he steps out into the rain, a police car pulls in front of him, driven by his friend and fellow cop Malcolm, who tells him to get in, and the 2 are off to the coal yard. When they get there, they are greeted by 2 paramedics and Trevor Parker, the son of the coal yard's owner. "We think you have a murder," came the greeting from one paramedic. Malcolm and Alan look around, but they don't see a body anywhere. So they both look back at the paramedics, kind of confused. And one paramedic says, "Look up." So they scan a little higher and spot it. At the very top of one of the coal piles, about 15 feet up, is something that definitely doesn't belong there. The 2 officers work their way up the pile, the coal constantly shifting under their feet as they go. And Alan notices something. As he and Malcolm are climbing, they're messing up this once perfect pile. But if it was perfect when they got there, how did this body get up there without messing it up? The body is lying face down, so the 2 men turn it over and even as seasoned policemen, they are not prepared for what they see. The face that rolls over to greet them is a frozen picture of fear, with eyes wide open and a mouth fixed in a silent scream. Alan recoils for a moment, but then years of training quickly take over and he starts examining the scene. The body is that of an older male wearing a nice brown suit. Interesting though, the suit is perfectly clean, while Alan and Malcolm are now covered in coal dust. How did he climb up here without so much as a smudge of dust on his clothes? Also, there's something off about the suit. The jacket is buttoned wrong, the pants are buttoned wrong, and he's only wearing a string vest under the jacket. It's like someone dressed him in these clothes and got it wrong. And it looks like someone gave him a really bad haircut. Like someone had just taken scissors and hacked away a few bits, some of them down to the scalp. Alan and Malcolm can't see any obvious cause of death, but they do see an open wound on the back of his neck at the base of his skull that looks to have some kind of greenish ointment smeared all over it. And they can also see a few penny-sized spots around his head and shoulders that look like burn marks. Well, there's not much more that they can do now, so they climb down the pile and call the Criminal Investigation Department. While they're waiting for the CID guys, they talk to Trevor Parker, the young man who discovered the body. He says he was at the coal yard this morning and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The coal yard is just this huge fenced-in area with piles of coal all around, and trucks go in and out throughout the day, either bringing in more coal or loading some up to take away. Trevor then leaves for lunch and to check on some of the other coal yards, and when he comes back around 3:45, he immediately sees something lying on top of one of those piles. He goes to check it out, sees a shoe, and calls the paramedics, thinking that it is yet another stray drunk who's found his way into the coal yard. Apparently it happens a lot. The pathologist who did the autopsy, Alan Edwards, noted that this guy had apparently been eating well and wasn't malnourished or dehydrated, although it doesn't look like he ate anything on the day that he died. And there's only about 1 day's worth of stubble on his face. And the time of death is calculated as being between 11:15 a.m. and 1:15 p.m. on the 11th. So the same day that he was found on the coal pile. So apparently right after Trevor left for lunch. And the burn marks around his head and shoulders look like some type of acid burns that he estimates to be about 2 days old. And the greenish jelly substance over the wound at the base of the skull is tested, and they can't identify it. There are no defensive wounds. The only other wounds on the body are a few small light cuts on the palms of both of his hands, both knees, and a small cut on the right thigh. The cause of death is ruled as heart failure, or more specifically, a combination of emphysema and ischemic heart disease. In other words, natural causes. Alan Godfrey is tasked with trying to figure out who this John Doe actually is. So he hits the pavement, checking out shops and pubs in the Todmorden area, but no one has ever seen this guy. He calls all the area hospitals to see if anyone has been treated for a head wound in the last few days, and nothing. Eventually, someone connects the dots and clues Alan Godfrey into a missing persons report of a man that sounds an awful lot like his John Doe. But it's from Tingley. That's almost 25 miles or 40 kilometers from Todmorden. What would he be doing out here? But lacking any other leads, Alan and the detective assigned to the case make that fateful trip to Tingley on June 18th, which lands them on Lottie's doorstep. She's heartbroken, but there's really not anything else that she can do but wait for the coroner's inquest to hopefully get some answers as to what the hell happened to her husband. Now, a coroner's inquest is a formal legal investigation conducted by the coroner with the help of the pathologist into a death where either the cause of death or the circumstances surrounding it remain unknown. In Ziggy's case, the coroner sticks to the pathologist's findings that Ziggy dies of natural causes. It's the circumstances surrounding it that are the issue. Despite protestations from Alan and Malcolm, they rule that Ziggy died where he was found. Alan and Malcolm are not even called to testify. Okay, fine. But if he disappeared on the 6th and he died on the 11th, where was he for those 5 days? And how did he end up at the top of the coal pile? Trevor Parker testified that he was not expecting any deliveries that day, so he didn't come in on a truck and get dumped. And that nice brown suit he was wearing? It wasn't his. Lottie confirmed that those were not the clothes Ziggy was wearing when he left the house. And where are his wallet and watch? The closest thing to a rational explanation to this entire scenario is that Ziggy had been kidnapped by a family member and held in a shed for 5 days. Remember Ziggy's cousin, Laska? Well, apparently she was staying with Ziggy and Lottie because things were not going well between her and her husband. Like, restraining order bad. So the theory is that Laska's husband, in a fit of rage, kidnaps Ziggy and tortures him for 5 days before Ziggy's heart just can't take it anymore and gives out. And exactly how did he think this would make things better with his wife? But police find zero evidence that this is how things actually went down. It just doesn't make sense. If that's what happened, why would Laska's husband dump Ziggy's body in a wide open area in the middle of the day when the chances of getting caught are pretty high? And if they dragged his dead body to the top of the pile, why aren't Ziggy's clothes covered in soot? And why bother to drag a heavy body to the top of the coal pile? And bonus, if he was dragged up there by someone, how did the pile of coal show no signs of anyone climbing it? Nonetheless, the coroner's inquest concludes with an open finding. In other words, they have no idea. But once the inquest is over, the coroner, James Turnbull, gives an odd statement to the press. The question of where he was before he died and what led to his death could not be answered. In my 12,000 cases, this is the most baffling I've ever had. If I was told a UFO took this man up and dropped him on the coal pile, I would only raise one eyebrow. Sounds like a weird end to a weird story, right? Well, it is, but that's not the end. At least not for Officer Alan Godfrey. As ticked off as he was about the results of the coroner's inquest, he managed to eventually leave all of the unanswered questions in the past and get back to his regular life as a Todmorden beat cop. Life was pretty much back to normal until the rainy, dreary evening of November 27th, 1980. So just 6 months after the discovery of Ziggy Adamsky's body on the coal pile. Alan has just started his night shift and is on his way to the northwest part of Todmorden to check out a report of a number of escaped cows out on an unsanctioned walkabout. When a second call comes in, somebody else has spotted the cows. But when Alan finally gets there, he doesn't see any cows. And that's when it dawns on him he's been punked, and so he just heads back to the station. But then a third call comes in from the same neighborhood complaining about the cows. But this time it's an old lady, not likely a practical joker. So he heads back out there. He gets to the house around midnight and is greeted at the door by a lovely older woman who invites him in and offers him some tea. And she explains that she had been sleeping but woke up because of some strange noises outside. She looked out the window and she saw 5 or 6 cows in the street, puts in her call to the police, and goes back to the window to keep tabs on those hooligan cows. It's then that she's hit with a blinding light that lights up her entire house. When the light fades, the cows are gone. Alan suggests that maybe it was just the headlights of a car passing by that scared the cows away. The old woman isn't so convinced. The following morning, toward the end of Alan's all-nighter shift, so now the morning of November 28th, at about 5 a.m., 3 officers in Halifax are wandering around north of the city around the moors. A moor is a low, hilly area covered in only low-growing vegetation and is sometimes wet, containing peat bogs. So these guys are out there checking out a tip on some stolen motorcycles. All 3 of them see a blue, pulsating light hanging just under the low cloud cover and moving erratically, not like any aircraft any of them have ever seen before. The movements are so wild and unpredictable that one of the officers said, "Enough of this, I'm going back to the car." The blue light then heads toward the officers, buzzes over the top of them, and takes off at a crazy fast speed in the direction of Todmorden. About 5 minutes later, in a little town on the outskirts of northern Manchester called Littleborough, 2 police officers sat in their car in the parking lot of a local pub called the White House when they noticed a blue, pulsating light off in the distance, hovering between 2 electrical towers. Oddly enough, neither of them saw the object appear, but they sat there just mesmerized by it. One of the officers makes a sketch drawing of the light, while the other radios into the station to let somebody know what it is that they are looking at. They stare at it for a few more minutes before it shoots off at a high rate of speed again towards Todmorden. Roughly 5 minutes later, so around 5:10 a.m., Alan is getting into his car for his last patrol around town before his shift ends. The rain had finally stopped, but he still had those stupid cows on his mind. So he heads off back toward that area to take one more stab at finding them. He's heading north on Burnley Road when he sees something in the road. About 5 minutes later, so around 5:15 a.m., Leonard Smith, the caretaker for Fernie Lee Junior School, which is north of Burnley Road, is walking across the school grounds when he notices something dark in the sky to the south of him, so right over Burnley Road. It's hard to see in the morning darkness, but it looks like it is rising from the road. And it zigzags a bit and then shoots off at an insane speed. Around 45 minutes later, Alan's friend and fellow officer, Malcolm, is just leaving the station at the end of his shift when Alan comes racing up in his police car, stops, rolls down the window, and tells Malcolm to get in now. Malcolm really just wants to go home, but Alan's face is pale with a very dire look. So Malcolm gets in the car and thinks, this better be good. It was. Trying to catch his breath and calm down, Alan tells Malcolm about how he was on his way back to the area of the renegade cows. But just as he was about to take a right off of Burnley Road to head north to the area, he sees something in the road about 100 yards in front of him, sitting in the middle of Burnley Road. So he passes the turnoff to go north and heads toward the object, thinking it's a bus that's crashing his jackknife across the road. But then he realizes that this thing is way bigger than a bus and is floating about 5 feet off the ground. By Alan's estimates, it's about 20 feet wide and 14 feet tall. And it's actually diamond-shaped and in 2 halves, the top half being stationary and the bottom half rotating. And it has a row of dark windows all the way around. Alan hears no sound, but notices the trees and bushes to the sides of the object are shaking all around as if there's a big wind blowing them all over. But Alan doesn't see or feel any wind. Alan stops his car about 30 feet away from the thing and turns on his blue police lights and hazard lights, because whatever it is, it's blocking the entire road. He tries to radio into the police station to let them know there is a problem on Burnley Road, but his personal radio doesn't work. Neither does the radio in the car. So he starts doing what every British constable is taught to do at the site of an accident. Alan takes out his notepad and starts to sketch what he sees. And he remembers starting that sketch, but not finishing it. Because before he has a chance, a brilliant light, like 100 suns, hits Alan's face. By the time the blindness from the light flash clears, the object is gone. And Alan is another 50 yards up the road with his hands on the steering wheel and the car rolling along in first gear. Blue police lights are off, hazard lights are off, and the headlights of the car are off. Alan quickly turns the car around and goes back. Now, remember, it's been raining all night, so everything is still wet except for that spot on the road. It's dry with a whirlpool pattern of twigs lying on the road. Now, it's almost 6 a.m. 30 minutes gone, literally in a flash. Malcolm doesn't know what to say about Alan's story as Alan drives him back to the spot where he saw whatever it is that he saw. And they get out of the car, and Malcolm can see the dry circle on the road with the whirlpool of twigs, just like Alan had described. He knelt down and touched the dry patch of the road. And despite it being a cold, rainy November morning, the dry patch is warm. They look around, and Alan remembers that they are right next to Centervale Park, hoping maybe to find some early morning joggers or dog walkers who had witnessed what Alan had witnessed. They grab their flashlights and head toward the park. They have to cross a small bridge that spans a gully that runs almost the entire length of the park parallel to Burnley Road. And when they get to the main gate, it's locked. To climb over the fence and just start walking through the park. And in the pre-dawn darkness, Alan can barely make out the outline of a number of dark shadows moving around on the other side of the park. He shines his flashlight in that direction, only to see, staring right back at him, the faces of a half a dozen cows. In the days and weeks that followed, Alan learned a number of very important things. First, he learned that it would be really hard for cows to wander from the neighborhood where they were first spotted through town, across the road, over the gully next to the road, and through the locked gate of the park. He also learned that the road leading to the house of the little old lady who served him tea while telling him of the disappearing cows was not situated in a way where lights from oncoming traffic could shine through her windows. Whatever that light was that shined in her house was not from a car. And he learned that all records concerning both Ziggy Adamsky's death and his own encounter, including the reports filed to the Ministry of Defense by not only himself, but the 3 other officers from Halifax as well, are totally locked down as classified. There's actually a lot more to Alan's story than I could cover here, but he wrote a book called Who or What Were They that details his entire ordeal that I will link in the description below if you care to take a deeper look into his story. So, what plucked Ziggy from the face of the earth, killed him, and set him back down on that pile of coal? And what happened in that 30-minute chunk of time that Alan lost that morning on the road? Do they have anything to do with each other? Or are these events just some massive coincidence? As much as I would love to say the truth is out there, in this case, I'm not sure we're ever going to find it. Tucked away in Dumfries, Scotland, is a place called the Crichton, which is a former Victorian era psychiatric complex. Now, before your mind wanders to all those horror movie cliches, let me tell you, this place is nothing like what's in your head. It's actually a peaceful campus, part of the local university with beautiful Victorian houses built of soft red sandstone, complete with stunning gardens, sprawling lawns, and this magnificent cathedral-style church right at its heart. Marcia works there as a night patrol security manager. Part of her job includes driving around the complex several times each night, windows down, listening for any alarm systems that might go off. Sounds insanely creepy to me, but Marcia says it's totally fine. Now, the abandoned care home and former World War II air base that she also has to patrol, that's a whole different story for another time. But back to the Crichton. One bitter cold December night in 2017, Marcia hears an alarm activate at Soulway House. And if she has to pick the creepiest building on campus, this one would be it. She drives over to the building and goes in, but everything looks okay. So she takes a closer look at the motion detector, and there is the culprit, a huge spider taking a midnight stroll across the motion detector. Ugh. Now I have to write up a whole report for a spider. So Marcia takes a seat at the bottom of the staircase and starts writing. That's when she hears it. Now, we're not talking about those little taps you see people freaking out about on ghost hunting shows. No, this is more like someone's upstairs throwing boxes around and rearranging furniture at 3 a.m. Keep in mind that this building is now used for art classes and music lessons, so it's not like there's anything in here to steal. But heeding the call of duty, Marcia jumps up and heads upstairs, all the lights blazing. Unfortunately, the only weapon she has is her flashlight, because in Scotland, they can't even carry mace. Are they supposed to sweet-talk criminals into submission? So she's got herself the biggest, sturdiest torch she can get. According to Marcia, this thing could probably stun a dogman. So she runs up the stairs, and the moment she reaches the top, everything goes silent. But somebody's got to be there, right? So she searches every single room, every cupboard, every toilet. Nothing. Despite all that racket she heard, everything's perfectly in place. Not a single thing disturbed. All the windows are locked tight. Plus, there's absolutely no wind outside, so it's certainly not rattling windows. Satisfied that nobody's there, she heads back downstairs to finish her paperwork. But the second she sits back down, the whole thing starts up again. Marcia lets out a word that's definitely not suitable for polite company, grabs her monster flashlight, and sprints back up the stairs. And just like before, the moment she hits that top step, dead silence. She does another thorough sweep, checking every nook and cranny, but everything's exactly as it should be. The funny thing is, the idea of a ghost hasn't even popped into her head yet. She's been working this job long enough that the Crichton has never once given her the creeps. It's always been a peaceful place. Until now. She heads back downstairs one more time, and that's when it happens. This cold, static electricity starts crawling across her skin. Now, Marcia's no stranger to the paranormal. She's had her fair share of experiences, and this sensation, it's like a big red warning light. Then she feels it. Something right behind her, following her down those stairs. And notice I said something, not someone. Because whatever this is, doesn't feel human, doesn't feel like a spirit, doesn't feel friendly. It feels all wrong, all kinds of wrong. The only thought running through Marcia's head is, don't let it know that you know it's there. Don't let it know you're scared. Though of course she is. Who wouldn't be? Having watched enough paranormal shows to know the drill, she starts reciting the prayer to the Archangel Michael in her head. Mind you, she's not even Catholic, but when things get dicey, you pull out all the stops. The moment she hits that bottom step, the feeling vanishes. She finishes up her paperwork, and wouldn't you know it, that banging and crashing starts right back up again. Well, Marcia's had enough. She plants herself at the bottom of those stairs and shouts, "I am too busy for your nonsense. I'm leaving now, so knock yourself out." With that, she locks up and drives off into the night. Back at the office, she starts telling her colleague, "I had an alarm at Soulway House. It was weird, but..." He cuts her off mid-sentence. "I meant to tell you, Soulway House is haunted as..." To this day, it remains Marcia's #1 paranormal experience, which, considering Marcia's own house in Dumfries, built back in 1870, seems to have an innocuous spirit or two hanging around. But she says she would never dream of asking them to leave. That would just be rude. After all, they were there first. Want more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew? You know where to click. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.